Picture a cliffside terrace. It is the middle of the night, and the wind isn't just blowing, it's literally roaring off the Atlantic Ocean.
Oh, like those howling physical gusts that just completely knock you off balance.
Exactly, the kind that rock a person back on their heels. And it is pouring rain. The drops are so incredibly cold, they feel like individual needle pricks against the skin.
That is such a harsh environment to drop right into.
It is. And standing right there, leaning against this squat marble railing, looking down into the churning black chasm of the sea 50 feet below, is a young woman.
Just right on the edge of the drop.
Right on the edge. And her nightgown is completely horribly stained red. Her hands are warm and they're sticky with blood. And in her grip, she is holding a knife, which the freezing rain is rapidly washing clean.
It is just a profoundly visceral image to start with. I mean, you have the raw, unfeeling power of the storm crashing against the immovable stone of the cliff. And right in the center of it, you have this deeply human element that is just completely drenched in violence.
Yeah, it's the immediate, chaotic aftermath of an absolute slaughter. Because inside the mansion behind her, every single window is blazing with light, and she can hear her sister screaming.
That auditory detail is terrifying.
It really is. It's a horrified, piercing cry just rising and falling like an air raid siren. It is the specific kind of scream that only happens when something absolutely unimaginable has violently fractured reality. Her parents are dead. Her life, as she knew it mere hours ago, it's gone forever.
And that scene sets you up for a very predictable emotional response, right? As the observer, you expect panic or hysteria or maybe this crushing despair.
Right, because that's the natural human reaction to trauma.
Exactly. But she looks at the knife and she considers using it one last time on herself. Just one final fatal stab.
But she doesn't do it.
No, she doesn't. She tosses it over the railing, and she watches it disappear into those black waves. And as she stands there, with the freezing rain pummeling her blood-soaked body, listening to her sister just screaming in the house, she doesn't feel panic.
No.
She doesn't feel grief. She feels relief.
And that specific emotion, that relief, is what makes this so psychologically jarring. It is a profoundly shocking sentiment to introduce at the climax of a family massacre.
It really throws you off balance.
Yeah.
Because she knows, in that specific moment, that she will soon be free of everything. So she turns her back on the ocean, calmly leaves the terrace, and walks to the garage to fetch a length of rope.
It is a terrifying sequence, but then the lens pulls back because we aren't actually on that terrace in 1929.
Wait, we aren't?
No, we're in a dusty, dimly lit bedroom decades later. That entire horrific scene is a memory, and it is being typed out painstakingly, one single letter at a time, by a 71-year-old paralyzed woman.
Oh, wow. That is quite the shift.
Right. She is slumped in a wheelchair, and she only possesses the limited use of her left hand. Someone else actually has to physically place her hand on the typewriter keys and push the return bar for her. The woman typing is Lenora Hope.
The legendary Lenora Hope.
The one and only. And she is addressing the unspoken question that just hovers around her like this dark cloud, a question you are likely already asking yourself as you listen to this. She types, "Am I as evil as everyone says I am?"
And her answer is so chilling in its ambiguity.
Yeah, she types. The answer is no, and yes.
Which immediately establishes this profound tension. Because you are trapped in this room with a woman who is physically capable of almost nothing, yet accused of doing absolutely everything.
So you might be wondering exactly what we are analyzing in our deep dive today. We have this fascinating stack of sources in front of us.
Yeah, we have historical case files detailing the infamous 1929 Hope family massacre in Maine, interwoven with these first-hand caregiver logs and personal accounts from 1983.
And our mission today is to dive deep into these materials to really understand how public perception creates monsters and to dissect the psychology of confinement, both physical and societal.
Which brings us right out of 1929 memories and straight into the present day of our sources, which is October 1983.
Yes, 1983. And this is where we meet the author of those caregiver logs, a woman named Kit McDeara. And honestly, if you put yourself in Kit's shoes, you realize her circumstances are, in their own quiet, crushing way, just as desperate as the storm on that cliffside.
Oh, without a doubt. The socioeconomic reality of Kit's life in 1983 is deeply, deeply bleak. I mean, she's 31 years old, entirely broke, and professionally disgraced.
Right. She has been suspended from her job as a home health caregiver for 6 months without pay.
Which is financially devastating. And as a result, she's been forced to move back into her childhood bedroom. And she isn't just living there, she is actively tiptoeing around a father whose absolute suffocating silence is infinitely more punishing than any screaming match could ever be.
Oh, the silent treatment is the worst.
It really is. He just radiates this profound, heavy disappointment that colors every single interaction they have. The isolation she's experiencing is palpable. She's basically living as a ghost in her own life, entirely shunned by her community.
And you really get a sense of that isolation when we see her in her employer's makeshift office. The agency is called Berlin Home Health Aides, and they've temporarily set up shop in what used to be a travel agency.
Right, but the inside is totally gutted.
Yeah, the windows still have those faded posters of sunny tropical escapes, but the space itself is now this empty, echoing aerobic studio, and the vast emptiness of the room perfectly mirrors Kit's own internal void. There are no shelves, no product displays, just a massive hollow space.
And sitting at a desk at the far end of this cavernous room is Mr. Gerlin, the agency director. He's described in the logs as thin, tall, and hawkish.
He sounds super intimidating.
He is. He operates with the grim efficiency of an undertaker, which is, fitting since his agency specializes in live-in end-of-life care.
Yeah.
But the thing is, he is actively maliciously punishing Kit.
Even though she was technically cleared.
Right. Exactly. Even though she has technically been cleared of the official wrongdoing that got her suspended, he still treats her as a massive liability. He knows she is financially drowning, and he absolutely uses that leverage against her.
So he offers her exactly one option.
Just one, a live-in assignment, caring for a 71-year-old stroke victim whose previous nurse fled abruptly in the middle of the night.
And the patient, of course, is Lenora Hope. Now, I have to push back here because this is where the behavioral logic of the narrative really tests me.
How so?
Well, why on earth would anyone accept this job? I mean, think about it. You're offered a live-in position, utterly isolated in a decaying mansion on a cliff, taking care of a legendary suspected mass murderer.
Right, and you're going to be there alone.
Exactly. I just don't buy that financial desperation alone makes someone move in with a potential serial killer. There has to be a subconscious desire on Kit's part to punish herself. What do the sources actually say about her psychological state at this moment?
That's a highly perceptive way to frame it. It's not just a simple financial transaction. But to truly understand why Kit accepts, we had to deeply analyze the socioeconomic and psychological trap she is caught in.
Okay, lay it out for me.
Kit isn't making a choice between a good option and a dangerous option. She is choosing between two distinct types of prisons. On one side, she has the psychological prison of her father's house.
With the heavy, silent judgment.
Yes. The weight of his silent, unyielding judgment is actively breaking her psyche. She has dwindled her meager savings to absolute zero. She has applied for jobs, stocking supermarket shelves and flipping burgers, and the town's stigma against her is so strong, she isn't even getting called in for interviews at minimum wage establishments.
Which means she's completely out of move. She has nowhere else to turn.
Exactly. Poverty and societal rejection form an iron vice. So does she have a subconscious desire to punish herself? Perhaps. I mean, it's very possible.
But it's mostly practical survival.
Primarily, yes. She is trading the psychological prison of her childhood home for the physical prison of a suspected killer's mansion simply because the physical prison pays a wage.
That makes sense. She rationalizes it by telling herself it's only temporary, just a few months to save enough cash to flee the state entirely.
But the truly terrifying element is the unspoken subtext of Mr. Gerlin's offer. He assigned her to Lenora Hope, specifically because Lenora is the one patient nobody in town, not even the local police, will shed a single tear over if Kit, with her tarnished record, accidentally kills her.
That is a staggering realization. Mr. Gerlin is essentially weaponizing Kit's ruined reputation.
He absolutely is.
And it makes sense only because of the mythic status Lenora holds in this main town. She isn't viewed as a senior citizen recovering from a stroke. She is the local boogeyman. When Kit hears the name, she instantly recalls this jump rope rhyme from her childhood.
Oh, the rhyme. It's so deeply unsettling.
It goes like this. At 17, Lenora Hope hung her sister with a rope, stabbed her father with a knife, took her mother's happy life. It wasn't me, Lenora said, but she's the only one not dead.
We really need to dissect how that schoolyard rhyme functions sociologically. Because when we look at how folklore develops, rhymes like this act as an extra-legal cultural jury.
A cultural jury. I like that framing.
Yeah, because in 1929, the official legal system couldn't touch Lenora. The police investigated the brutal slaughter of 3 people, but they hit a massive brick wall. All the servants had conveniently been given the night off.
Of course they were.
Right, there were zero witnesses and absolutely no physical evidence linking a petite 17-year-old girl to the systematic, physically demanding murders of her entire family. Because the justice system requires evidence, she was never charged or convicted.
But the town needed closure. I mean, you can't just have three prominent, wealthy citizens butchered in their beds and accept that there's no answer. The cognitive dissonance is just too much for a community to bear.
Precisely. Nature abhors a vacuum, and society abhors an unsolved atrocity. The public consciousness needed a scapegoat to restore a sense of order. So they basically bypassed the court of law entirely and created a folklore conviction.
They distilled the complex trauma of the event into a catchy, macabre jingle sung by children.
Yes, and notice the structure of the rhyme. The very first line. At 17, Lenora Hope locks in her identity and her blame before it even lists the crimes.
It doesn't leave any room for doubt.
Exactly. It cements her guilt so efficiently and so thoroughly that decades later the townspeople just accept it as objective historical fact. The rhyme literally replaces the gavel.
It really highlights the terrifying power of collective memory. If society decides you are a monster, the facts no longer matter. So Kit, armed with this terrifying folklore, packs up her life.
And it takes barely any time at all.
Barely any. She packs a medical bag, a suitcase of faded, out-of-date clothes, and this heavy box of her late mother's paperback books. And there's this incredibly poignant, grounded moment right before she leaves the house. She finds her father sitting in his lazy-boy recliner, eating a sandwich and watching the noon news.
What's playing on the news?
President Reagan is on the screen giving a speech about the economy, and her dad just mutters at the television, "Bullshit, Ronnie. Try doing something that'll help guys like me for once."
That brief interaction offers a crucial snapshot of the macroeconomic reality of 1983. And, to be totally clear, our goal here isn't to weigh in on Reaganomics or to endorse or condemn her father's political stance.
Right, we're remaining impartial on the politics.
Exactly. We're simply looking at this from a sociological lens to understand the deep working-class frustration that forms the bedrock of Kit's reality. While the early 80s are often painted with broad strokes of economic boom and Wall Street excess, there was a very real, palpable anxiety among blue-collar workers who felt entirely disconnected from those high-level economic policies.
Her father is a man who spends his days fixing clanging pipes in old, drafty houses.
Yeah, he feels completely invisible to the power structures of the country.
And that baseline reality of Kit's world, this blue-collar, struggling, financially precarious life, is vital because it stands in such stark, almost absurd contrast to the destination she is driving toward.
The transition is incredibly jarring.
It is. She throws her meager belongings into a beat-up Ford Escort, endures a deeply depressing transactional goodbye with her neighbor Kenny, and blasts Duran Duran on the cassette deck as she drives up the coast.
The Duran Duran detail is so perfectly 1983.
I know, it really places you in the era. And she is physically moving out of a world of dingy ranch homes and climbing upward into a totally different stratum of society. The road hugs the coastline, taking her higher and higher until the ocean is just a dizzying blur of white water crashing against rocks 50 feet below. She is entering the geographical area known as the Cliffs.
And the geography itself tells a story of class and power. When Winston Hope, Lenora's father, built his estate back in the 1920s, he didn't choose the established, genteel, wealthy enclaves of the era, like Bar Harbor.
Where all the old money was.
Exactly. He specifically chose raw, undeveloped, jagged land on a cliff face. And why? Because he wanted to dominate the landscape. The architecture of wealth often relies on elevation.
He wanted to be above everyone else.
Literally and figuratively. He wanted pristine, uninterrupted views of the ocean, and more importantly, he wanted everyone else in the struggling town below to have to physically crane their necks upward to look at his fortune. It is the absolute architecture of hubris.
But hubris has an expiration date, right? Because when Kit actually pulls up to the estate, the illusion of that Gilded Age grandeur shatters immediately. The property is called Hope's End, which is a startlingly apocalyptic, almost cursed name for a family home.
That doesn't exactly sound welcoming.
Not at all. And the iron gate at the entrance is rusted and shivering in the coastal wind. She actually has to enlist the help of a young man named Carter, who happens to be walking by, just to force the gate open on its corroded hinges.
Because she can't even get in on her own.
Right. And when she gets her first real look at the mansion, I mean, you often hear grand estates described as beautiful wedding cakes, but that analogy completely fails here.
Yeah, that doesn't fit at all. What analogy do you think fits better? based on the sources.
Honestly, Hope's End isn't just decaying, it's acting like a biological sinkhole. Think of a dying star that collapses inward, pulling all the light and matter around it down into the dark. Winston Hope built a black hole of a house, and without the immense wealth and social power to sustain it, it is actively decomposing, threatening to pull anyone inside down with it.
That is a much more accurate framework. The physical decay of Hope's End is incredibly symbolic of the family's internal ruin. I mean, the caregiver logs describe a gaping hole in a second-floor window that has been hastily covered over by cheap plywood.
Plywood on a mansion.
Yeah, it's wild. Chunks of ornate marble detailing have cracked off and just shattered on the ground below. A fifth of the slate roof shingles are entirely missing, giving the massive structure a battered, pockmarked, almost diseased appearance.
It sounds horrifying.
It is. Winston Hope built it as a monument to his own self-importance, a brutalist flex of his shipping fortune. But nature and time are relentlessly reclaiming it. The rot you see on the exterior is merely a physical manifestation of the moral rot that was always present on the inside.
And the people guarding this rotting monument are just as severe and unwelcoming as the architecture itself. Kit rings the bell, and the heavy double doors are thrown open by Mrs. Baker, the housekeeper.
Oh, Mrs. Baker's a piece of work.
She is a striking, deeply intimidating figure. She is completely monochromatic. She has severe white hair, a pitch black dress, a starched lace collar that looks uncomfortably rigid, pale skin, and this bold, defiant slash of cherry red lipstick.
She sounds like a classic Gothic villain.
Truly. And she immediately looks down her nose at Kit's cheap, pilled blue coat. She speaks with absolute dictatorial authority, informing Kit that with Lenora incapacitated, she has, quote, assumed the burden of running the house.
Mrs. Baker's role as the gatekeeper requires some deep psychological analysis, because the historical files show she originally arrived at Hope's End in 1928, just a year prior to the murders, hired as a 19-year-old tutor.
So she was there before it all went down.
She was, and following the massacre, she briefly left but inexplicably returned to devote her entire adult life to Lenora's care. But her devotion lacks any warmth, it feels deeply authoritarian.
It really does.
She immediately dictates the rules to Kit, stating unequivocally that Lenora will never go outside. Ever. Not even for a critical medical emergency at a hospital. She declares, Miss Hope was born in this house, and this is where she will die.
That is so extreme.
It forces you to question her true function.
Yeah.
Is Mrs. Baker a protector, selflessly shielding Lenora from a town that despises her? Or is she a warden, enforcing a lifelong extrajudicial house arrest?
Based on the interior of the house, it definitely leans toward warden. The inside of Hope's End is this bizarre, suffocating mixture of extreme opulence and complete neglect. There are potted palms that have clearly seen better days and oil-painted ceilings depicting puffy pink clouds, but every single surface is coated in a thick, oppressive layer of dust and gloom.
It's like time just stopped.
It did. And then there is the hallway of portraits. When I read this detail in the source material, I actually had to stop and reread it to fully process the psychological violence of it.
The portraits are intense.
There are 4 identical, massive oil paintings. 3 of them, depicting the father Winston, the mother Evangeline, and the sister Virginia, are completely hidden behind black silk mourning crepe.
Right, standard Victorian mourning practice.
But wait, the fabric isn't just draped elegantly over the tops. It is pulled incredibly taut across the canvas and literally nailed directly into the wooden frames.
You're right to stop and analyze that, because nailing the mourning crepe into the frames is not a standard expression of grief.
No, it's aggressive.
It is a hostile act of erasure. It is essentially an execution of memory. It signifies a refusal to look at the dead while simultaneously refusing to actually take the paintings down. You can just faintly see the hazy, featureless shapes of the parents and the sister trapped behind the sheer black fabric, like ghosts imprisoned in the walls.
And sitting right next to those imprisoned ghosts is the 4th portrait. It's the only one left exposed. It is 17-year-old Lenora, painted a mere 8 months before the murders.
The contrast there must be unbelievable.
It's breathtaking. The contrast between the black nailed-down crepe and this bright painting is just so stark. Lenora is wearing a vibrant pink satin gown, sitting gracefully on a white divan. She looks delicate, bursting with life, like a flower just about to bloom.
But she doesn't look totally innocent, right?
No, there's an undeniable spark of mischief, perhaps even defiance in her bright green eyes. She's looking directly out of the canvas at the painter, and by extension at you, almost as if she knows exactly the horrific things people are going to be saying about her in the future.
That specific portrait serves as a critical time capsule. It preserves Lenora at the exact, precise moment the public narrative froze her identity. To the outside world and to the town below, she will never age.
She's permanently 17.
Exactly. She will always remain the 17-year-old girl in the pink satin dress gripping a bloody knife. She is a static monster in the public imagination. But the house itself refuses to stay frozen. It is actually moving.
Literally moving.
Yes. As Mrs. Baker leads Kit down the hallway, the logs describe Kit experiencing this intense, disorienting wave of vertigo. The entire mansion is quite literally leaning toward the sea.
Because it's built right on the cliff.
Right. Either the massive stone foundation is settling unevenly, or the cliff face itself is slowly giving way to decades of erosion, causing the floors to tilt precariously.
And it's not just a subtle, charming quirk of an old house. The tilt is severe. The heavy doors to the bedrooms actually creak open on their own because gravity just pulls them along the slanted floorboards.
That would drive me crazy.
Right. And the environment compounding this vertigo is deeply claustrophobic. The hallways are narrow, dim tunnels covered in a dark, peacock blue damask wallpaper. Kit notes that the ornate floral pattern looks less like a decoration and more like an aggressive, vicious garden that has grown wild and is now actively strangling the house from the inside.
So she's dizzy and she feels strangled.
Yeah, walking down that tilted hallway makes her feel physically unstable, like she's had 3 strong drinks on an empty stomach.
The tilted floor and the aggressive wallpaper work in tandem to create an environment meticulously designed to keep the inhabitants off balance. It is a psychological landscape of instability mapped onto a physical space. It keeps you perpetually on edge.
And you need something to break that tension.
Exactly. And right in the middle of this dusty 1920s decaying Gothic gloom, the sources introduce a sudden, incredibly jarring splash of the 1980s. Kit bumps into Jessica, the estate's maid.
I love Jessica in these logs.
She's amazing. Jessica is wearing a classic starched black and white uniform, but her hair is dyed a garish, unnatural red with thick neon blue streaks that dangle right around her face. She has bright blue eyeshadow, bubblegum pink lipstick, and half a dozen cheap, clattering plastic rainbow bracelets stacked on each wrist.
Jessica is just a fantastic element. She is pure, unadulterated 1980s MTV energy injected straight into a stagnant haunted house.
It's almost comical.
It is. The clash of eras is hilarious, but it serves a very important narrative function. It grounds us. It reminds you, the listener, that outside these suffocating walls, time has actually marched on. The world has changed.
But not inside Hope's End.
No, inside Hope's End,
Yeah.
time completely stopped on that bloody night in 1929. And nowhere is that temporal freeze more evident than when Kit finally reaches the master bedroom and meets Lenora Hope in person. Kit really braces herself. She has the jump rope rhyme echoing in her head. She's expecting a monster. She is expecting the vibrant, defiant girl from the painting. But when she walks into the room, she finds a ghost.
The visual discrepancy is staggering. The woman before Kit is 71 years old, slumped heavily in an antique wheelchair. She has been completely sapped of all color, almost fading into the background of the decaying house.
Just entirely gray.
Yes. She has thin gray hair cascading down her shoulders, gray, translucent skin, and an ashen nightgown that has been washed so many times it has lost all its structure. She is a mere wisp of a human being. The entire right side of her body is paralyzed from a series of severe strokes.
She's got the Walkman on.
Right. The juxtaposition is fascinating because this frail, silent woman is wearing a modern pair of 1980s Walkman headphones, happily listening to the brightly colored maid Jessica read salacious Jackie Collins novels onto cassette tapes.
It's such a wonderfully humanizing, mundane detail that immediately undercuts the whole monster myth. But what truly captures Kit's attention and holds her absolutely spellbound are Lenora's eyes. They're the exact same blazing, laser-like green as the portrait downstairs.
Time hasn't touched her eyes at all.
Not a bit. But instead of the madness, malice, or cold calculation Kit expected to find in the eyes of an alleged family annihilator, Kit sees deep curiosity. She sees a profound empathy.
Empathy.
Yeah. Lenora looks up at Kit as if she can see right through her defenses, as if she already knows exactly what it feels like to be trapped, accused, judged, and entirely ostracized by the world.
Now, as analytical readers of these sources, this is the perfect moment to address the massive, glaring elephant in the room, the logical impossibility that Kit herself wrestles with.
We have to talk about the physical mechanics.
We do. When you look at this woman, you have to ask, How could this frail, paralyzed entity possibly have committed the brutally violent, highly physical acts described in the rhyme? I mean, how do you hang a struggling teenage girl with a rope and repeatedly stab two adults to death when you are confined to a wheelchair and unable to lift half of your body?
Exactly. The physical mechanics simply don't add up. It's impossible.
They don't work now. But we have to rigorously maintain the timeline. The murders happened in 1929. Lenora was 17, young, and entirely able-bodied. Her current devastating physical state is not the result of the events of that night, but rather the compounding tragedies of her later life.
The sources outline her medical history pretty clearly.
They do. The medical logs show she contracted polio in her 20s, a disease that ravaged her nervous system and permanently cost her the use of her legs. Then, decades later, she suffered a series of debilitating strokes that paralyzed her right side and robbed her of the ability to speak.
Kit actually makes an incredibly profound analogy in her notes here, referencing Oscar Wilde's classic novel, The Picture of Dorian Gray.
Oh, that's a brilliant connection.
But she notes that the dynamic at Hope's end is the exact opposite of the book. In Wilde's novel, Dorian Gray stays young, beautiful, and physically perfect forever, while his hidden portrait ages and morphs, absorbing all the hideous rot and decay of his many sins.
Right, the painting gets ugly while he stays perfect.
Yeah. But here, the portrait in the hall remains perfectly young, vibrant, and eternally innocent in its pink satin gown. Meanwhile, Lenora's actual physical body is the thing wasting away, crippled by polio and paralyzed by strokes. It's almost as if she is visibly paying a physical price, atoning for her sins in real time while the painting mocks her with the innocence she lost.
It's a highly effective inversion of the standard Gothic trope. Lenora's body has basically become a topographical map of suffering. Because her vocal cords and right side are paralyzed, her ability to communicate with the outside world is reduced to agonizingly slow binary mechanics.
Just tapping.
Yeah, she can tap her functioning left hand against the armrest of her wheelchair. One tap means no, two taps mean yes. It is a suffocating limitation. But the logs reveal that the previous nurse, Mary, introduced a rudimentary way for Lenora to say more than just yes or no.
And that's where the typewriter comes in.
Exactly. Sitting on a small desk in the corner of the room is a heavy, mint green 1960s typewriter.
And the sheer physical mechanics of using that typewriter are a monumental struggle. It is not a quick process. Kit describes having to wheel Lenora over to the desk, physically lift her heavy left hand, and carefully place it hovering over the keyboard.
It requires so much effort.
So much. Lenora then has to expend immense concentration to locate a letter and use all of her dwindling strength to press her single index finger down hard enough to make the mechanical type bar strike the ribbon and hit the paper. Thwack.
And then she has to do it all over again.
Yes. Then she has to hover, search, and find the next letter. Thwack. And because her reach is so limited, Kit has to manually slide the carriage return bar back for her at the end of every line. It is exhausting for both of them. Kit estimates that Lenora types at a punishing rate of roughly 1 word per minute.
Just 1 word per minute. The incredibly deliberate, grueling pacing of this communication forces you and forces Kit to really hang on to the significance of every single letter.
You can't waste energy on small talk.
Exactly. The immense physical effort involved guarantees that Lenora is only going to type exactly what she feels is absolutely, vitally necessary. Her first message to her new caregiver is simple, uncapitalized, and unpunctuated. She types, "Hello, Kit."
Just hello, Kit.
Then, after a long pause, she types a crucial declaration. "My body is dead, but my mind is alive." She desperately wants to assure Kit that despite the absolute physical ruin sitting in the wheelchair, the intellect, the awareness, and the humanity behind those piercing green eyes are fully intact.
And then, noticing Kit's obvious apprehension and fear of being in the room with the notorious accused killer, Lenora painstakingly types out a third message. She writes, "Don't be scared, I can't hurt you."
Which is a remarkably loaded, ambiguous statement. When you really parse the phrasing, "I can't hurt you," think about what she's not saying.
She doesn't deny the murders.
Exactly. She doesn't say, "I'm not a murderer." She doesn't say, "The rhyme is a lie." Does she mean she wouldn't hurt Kit because she lacks the malicious desire? Or does she simply mean she lacks the physical capability to inflict harm in her current paralyzed state?
I can't physically do it.
Right. She is essentially saying, "Look at my body. I am physically unable to harm you even if I wanted to." It is a statement of current fact that leaves the question of her past guilt completely and uncomfortably open.
It really does. It provides zero reassurance about what actually happened in 1929. And the horrifying reality of that potential past guilt hits Kit in a deeply visceral, tactile way during a routine physical therapy exercise later that week.
Oh, the hand exercise scene. That is intense.
It is. The fiercely protective housekeeper, Mrs. Baker, instructed Kit that she needs to regularly exercise Lenora's functioning left hand to prevent muscle atrophy. So, Kit is sitting across from Lenora, holding her left hand, guiding her fingers to squeeze around an empty plastic pill bottle.
Just a standard, mundane medical routine.
Yeah, and Kit is marveling at how surprisingly strong Lenora's grip still is. Seeking some kind of connection, Kit asks a probing emotional question. She asks if Lenora misses her parents.
And how does Lenora respond?
Lenora looks at her and taps her hand twice on the armrest. Yes. Then, pushing further, Kit asks, "And your sister? Do you miss her too?"
This is a critical pivot point in their interaction,
Yeah.
because Lenora doesn't hesitate. She delivers a single, adamant, forceful tap that literally stings Kit's palm. No, she does absolutely not miss her sister, Virginia.
And in that exact second, feeling the surprising strength of that single tap against her skin, holding that hand, it hits Kit like a lightning bolt. A wave of physical nausea washes over her.
Because of what she realizes.
Yes. She realizes that this hand, the very one currently resting warmly in her palm, is the exact hand that allegedly gripped the hilt of the knife that slaughtered her parents. It is the hand that pulled the rope tight around her sister's neck.
The physical connection to the violence is suddenly very real.
The realization of what this flesh and bone might have done is so repulsive, so overwhelming, that Kit actually drops Lenora's hand in horror and recoils in her chair.
It's a moment of profound, involuntary physical revulsion. But what is truly fascinating to analyze in the logs is Lenora's reaction to Kit's horror.
She isn't angry, right?
No. At first, there is a flicker of genuine hurt in Lenora's eyes. But that hurt very quickly shifts into something else entirely. She looks amused.
Amused. That's so creepy.
It is. And she is amused because she knows exactly what thought just paralyzed her caregiver. She has seen this exact same realization wash over the faces of dozens of nurses and tutors for 50 years. She deeply understands her own monstrosity in the eyes of the outside world. She isn't angry at Kit's reaction. She has simply resigned herself to the fact that her touch is considered contaminated.
But interestingly, this shared understanding of being a pariah, of being judged and feared by the world, is what ultimately bridges the gap between them. And it happens in the most intimate, vulnerable of settings, the bathroom.
We really have to consider the mechanics of caregiving here.
This isn't that easy work.
No. Bathing a completely paralyzed adult is an incredibly fraught, physically demanding, and intimate process. The bathroom at Hope's End is described as stuffy, silent, and filled with the rhythmic, metallic hiss of an old radiator.
Kit actually has to use a cumbersome mechanical Hoyer lift, securing a canvas sling around Lenora's frail body just to safely transfer her from the wheelchair into the massive clawfoot tub.
That takes a lot of trust from the patient.
It does. And as Kit is kneeling by the tub, gently cupping warm water in her hands and pouring it over Lenora's gray hair, taking immense care not to get soap in her eyes, she experiences a profound flashback. She is transported back to doing this exact same tender, heartbreaking motion for her own mother.
The act of washing someone else's hair, especially someone who is physically helpless, is deeply intimate. It is an act of total surrender on the part of the patient. Kit describes the quiet, steamy atmosphere of the bathroom as feeling almost like a baptismal chamber.
A baptismal chamber. That's a powerful image.
It is. And that atmosphere of quiet vulnerability naturally lowers Kit's defenses, transitioning her mindset into a feeling of confession. The steam, the silence, the rhythmic pouring of water, it compels Kit to explain herself.
She needs to get it off her chest.
Exactly. She looks at this paralyzed woman who has been judged as a monster by society for 50 years, and Kit feels this overwhelming need to confess to someone who might actually understand. So she starts talking about the specific, agonizing details that led to her suspension from the agency.
Right. She finally reveals the details she couldn't fully explain to the hostile Mr. Gerlin, and the nuances the police entirely failed to grasp. Her previous patient before her suspension was not a stranger, it was her own mother.
Which completely changes the dynamic of the caregiving.
Entirely. Her mother was dying in absolute relentless agony from late-stage stomach cancer. It was a terminal diagnosis, the treatments had failed, and the pain was described as unbearable, stripping away her mother's dignity day by day.
It's a horrific situation for anyone to be in.
It really is. Now, the Guerlain Agency protocol strictly mandated that all heavy lethal painkillers must be kept locked inside a metal lockbox stored securely under the caregiver's bed. The patient was never to have direct access.
Which is standard safety procedure.
Sure. But one night, exhausted and emotionally shattered, Kit failed to put the heavy bottle of fentanyl pills away. She left them sitting right on her mother's bedside table.
And during that night, while Kit slept, her mother reached over, unscrewed the cap of the bottle, and swallowed every single pill inside, save for one. She died of a massive, intentional overdose.
And when the local police inevitably investigated the death as a potential assisted suicide, Detective Vic brought Kit in for a grueling interrogation.
Those interrogations are designed to break people.
And during that interrogation, sitting under the fluorescent lights of the precinct, Kit made a fatal error in judgment. She committed the error of absolute, unvarnished honesty.
Oh, you can't always be completely honest with the police.
You really can't. When the detective bluntly asked how she felt when she walked into the bedroom and found her mother dead, Kit replied, sad and relieved.
Relieved. There's that exact word again. The very same emotion from the cliffside in 1929.
It bridges the two stories perfectly.
This is the absolute crux of the psychological conflict in these source materials. We really need to dive deep into the psychology of relief in traumatic, prolonged end-of-life situations. Society constructs very rigid expectations for how we are supposed to process death.
We have to perform grief in a certain way.
Exactly. Society demands a public performance of pure, unadulterated grief. We want to see weeping, we want total devastation, we want the survivor to be utterly destroyed by the loss.
But the private reality is different.
The private reality of being a caregiver, of watching someone you love suffer agonizing, incurable, dehumanizing pain day after day, month after month, is incredibly complex and traumatic in its own right. When the end finally comes, feeling a sense of relief that their profound suffering is finally over, and yes, relief that your exhausting vigil has ended, is a deeply natural, profoundly human emotion.
It is a psychological release valve.
Precisely. But in the adversarial context of a police interrogation about a potential assisted suicide, admitting to feeling relief is catastrophic.
Yeah.
To a detective looking for a motive, relief sounds exactly like a confession of guilt.
It provides the motive on a silver platter. It makes her look guilty to Detective Vic, it makes her look like a liability to Mr. Guerlain, and most devastatingly of all, it makes her look guilty to her own father.
Which explains his silence.
It is the exact reason her father sits in silence and won't look her in the eye. He firmly believes that Kit intentionally facilitated her mother's death. And this brilliant parallel brings us right back to our opening hook.
The girl on terrace?
Think about the young Lenora, standing on the bloody terrace in 1929, feeling relief knowing she is finally free from whatever horror was occurring inside that house. Both of these women experienced the most shocking, life-altering trauma imaginable, and both of them felt a profoundly transgressive, socially unacceptable emotion in the immediate aftermath.
And in that steamy bathroom, Kit finally bridges that historical and psychological gap verbally. Standing over the bathtub, looking down at the frail woman in the water, Kit speaks her dark secret aloud to Lenora. She says, "That's the biggest thing we have in common, is that everyone thinks I also killed my mother."
It is such a powerful seismic shift in their dynamic.
It changes everything.
In that single moment of shared confession, they completely transcend the typical transactional caregiver-patient relationship. They are no longer just a desperate employee and a silent invalid. They are two women who have been fundamentally cast out by society, both presumed guilty of the ultimate familial taboo, killing their own family members.
And they are now trapped together in a sinking, rotting house on the edge of a jagged cliff, isolated from the world that judged them.
There is this profound, unspoken solidarity forged in the steam of that bathroom.
Which creates the perfect, necessary environment of trust for Lenora to finally break her 50-year silence and tell her story. This transition leads us into the opening pages of the manuscript that Lenora begins to painstakingly type out, letter by agonizing letter, with Kit's help.
And she sets some very strict ground rules before she begins.
Yes, Lenora sets her terms very clearly right from the start, refusing to play the role of the tragic victim. She explicitly states she doesn't want Kit's pity. And crucially, she types that she isn't doing this to prove her innocence or clear her name in the eyes of a town she despises.
She doesn't care what they think anymore.
She knows her health is failing rapidly and she might die any day. She simply wants the facts recorded before she goes. She wants to leave a definitive record of the truth, whatever that may be.
And the facts she starts with do not begin on the night of the murders. They go all the way back to the rotting foundational bedrock of Hope's End itself. Lenora reveals the deeply toxic, scandalous origins of her family structure.
The parents' marriage was not exactly a fairy tale.
Far from it. Her mother, Evangeline, was a wealthy socialite who had a highly scandalous affair with a lowly servant in Boston. She became pregnant out of wedlock, and in the 1920s she was on the verge of being entirely disowned and socially ruined by her aristocratic family.
A total scandal for the era.
Winston Hope, who possessed immense new money wealth but lacked social pedigree, swooped in and married her, effectively purchasing a bride and covering up the scandal.
But Winston didn't do it out of a profound rescuing love or altruism. Lenora's manuscript asserts that her father built Hope's End on that isolated, treacherous cliff, precisely to geographically and socially isolate his new scandalous wife and to aggressively flaunt his immense wealth.
It was about control.
Entirely. It was an act of supreme ego, a brutalist monument to his own self-importance and control, designed to force society to look at what he possessed. The house was never a home. It was essentially a massive gilded cage built on a foundation of scandal, coercion, and absolute patriarchal control.
And the manuscript details how that control extended to his children in terrifying psychological ways. Lenora describes this chilling detail about her childhood that completely reframes the family dynamic. Winston Hope had a favorite sadistic quote-unquote game.
The game is so messed up.
When he was displeased, he used to lock his young daughters, Lenora and Virginia, inside their bedrooms. The twisted game was to see which sister could go the longest without crying or begging through the heavy wood to be let out.
He was conditioning them to endure captivity.
Yes, he systematically normalized physical entrapment and psychological deprivation as a standard childhood competition.
Which essentially turns the family estate into a literal, functioning prison operated entirely by the patriarch. He is the warden of his own family. And the architectural manifestation of this need for absolute control is perhaps the most terrifying detail revealed in this section of the sources.
The doors.
Yes. Lenora types out a structural detail about the house that changes everything. She reveals that the heavy wooden doors to the bedrooms at Hope's End, the doors lining those claustrophobic, tilted peacock blue hallways, were specially constructed by her father. They can only be locked from the outside.
Only from the outside. Just let the reality of that architectural choice sink in for a moment. If you are inside the bedroom, you cannot secure your own space.
You have zero privacy or safety.
You cannot lock the door to keep anyone out. But whoever is standing in the hallway has the power to lock you in. You are completely physically at the mercy of whoever holds the keys.
It fundamentally alters how you must view the power dynamics of the Hope family leading up to the 1929 massacre. In a house deliberately designed like a literal prison, where the patriarch controls the physical locks and psychological entrapment is normalized as a routine childhood game, it creates an environment of absolute terrifying vulnerability for the women and absolute unchecked authority for the man.
It leaves you with a dark, lingering thought to mull over. In an environment that's suffocating and toxic, where power is wielded so absolutely and isolation is enforced by the very architecture of the home you live in, is it any wonder that it eventually breeds unspeakable violence?
So as we continue our deep dive into the second part of the source material, we really need to start with the sheer physical reality of Hope's End. It's not just a backdrop.
Right, it's basically a character, an active, incredibly menacing participant in the whole thing.
Exactly. I mean, we usually think of architecture as, a static discipline. You pour a foundation, you build the walls plumb, the roof seals it all in, and it exists as this passive container for human activity.
Yeah, passive container. That's a good way to put it.
But living inside Hope's End is this ongoing, violently somatic experience. The entire mansion is tilted toward that eroding main cliffside.
And the physical toll that incline takes on the human body is just staggering. I mean, your vestibular system, your inner ear is constantly fighting a battle. It can never win inside that house.
Oh, absolutely.
When we talk about the tilt, we aren't just talking about like a quirky architectural feature where a marble might roll across the living room floor.
Right, it's not a fun house.
No, not at all. We are talking about a severe geometric disruption. Kit actually mentions waking up to find her body, the mattress, and all the blankets bunched up at the very bottom of the bed.
I can't even imagine. She is literally sliding down an invisible slope while she's unconscious.
Exactly. Her body is in motion even when she's asleep.
Like, have you ever been on a boat for a few days, and when you finally step back onto dry land, the ground still feels like it's swaying beneath you?
Oh yeah, getting your sea legs, it takes days to wear off.
Right, and that is your brain trying to anticipate an unstable environment. Now, apply that feeling to a waking nightmare. Kid is experiencing this profound, deep tissue muscle exhaustion.
And she attributes it at first to the labor of caregiving, lifting and moving a patient.
But the reality is her kinetic chain is subconsciously overcompensating for the slant of the floorboards every single second she is awake. She is constantly bracing against gravity.
And that physical bracing perfectly mirrors the psychological bracing required to survive in that kind of environment. The somatic fatigue bleeds directly into her cognitive fatigue.
Which just wears her down completely.
Right. When your amygdala is constantly firing because your body feels like it is on the verge of falling over, you exist in a permanent state of fight or flight. You literally cannot relax.
And the house offers zero respite from that. I mean, the antiquated plumbing, those loud pull-cord toilets, the rotting wallpaper, it is a space trapped in a really decaying past.
Which brings us to, honestly, the most jarring collision of past and present in the entire house.
Oh, you mean Jesse?
Jesse and the murder tour. We have to dissect Jesse's entire presence here because it is fascinating from a psychological standpoint.
It's so wild. We are standing in this grim, tilted 1920s Gothic mausoleum, essentially, and Jesse knocks on Kit's door wearing stirrup pants, an oversized Madonna t-shirt, and just layers of jangling jewelry.
It's quite a mental image. I read Jesse's 1980s neon aesthetic as a deliberate cognitive shield.
Oh, a shield. I like that.
Yeah, she is wrapping herself in this aggressively modern, brightly colored pop culture of her current era to deflect the oppressive, faded velvet trauma of 1929. The anachronism is her armor.
I completely agree with that. And she weaponizes that armor by insisting on taking Kit on what she literally calls the murder tour.
Her logic for doing it is terrifyingly pragmatic, too.
Right. She's like, Kit needs to know which rooms the family was slaughtered in so she can avoid them while cleaning. But Jesse's attitude during this tour is what really breaks the brain.
It's so unsettling.
She treats the sites of a brutal triple homicide like stops on a macabre roadside attraction. She even throws out that pun, "Abandon all hope, ye who enter here," making a joke out of the murdered family's name.
It is the psychology of dark tourism, but applied to one's own workplace, which is it's just bizarre.
How does someone even cope like that?
Well, when your job requires you to clean a house defined by historical butchery, you have very limited psychological options. You can internalize the terror and live in a state of paralysis, or you can completely disassociate and shut down.
Which seems to be Mrs. Baker's strategy, honestly.
Exactly. Or you take Jesse's route. You can actively mock the horror. She trivializes the violence to strip it of its power.
So turning it into a joke gives her power over it.
By turning the massacre into a theatrical tour, she places herself in the role of the guide, the one with the authority. It gives her a false sense of control over a narrative that is fundamentally totally uncontrollable.
That makes a lot of sense. But let's talk about the physical spaces on that tour, because the forensic reality of these rooms contradicts the official story of the massacre at almost every single turn.
Oh, the spatial logic is just a mess.
Right. The first stop is the grand stairs. Kit stands on the landing directly beneath this massive stained glass window and looks down at this huge, unruly red splotch that is 2 shades darker than the surrounding carpet.
The bloodstain where Evangeline Hope bled out.
And the spatial logic of that specific bloodstain requires some really serious scrutiny. The established pattern indicates Evangeline was stabbed in the foyer, right?
That's the official story, yes.
Then she ran up the stairs, where she was stabbed again and died on the landing.
I mean, make that make sense.
Exactly. If an assailant comes at you with a blade in the entryway of a house, the primal biological instinct is to flee toward the exterior. You run for those massive front doors.
You run outside into the open air where you actually have a spatial advantage and can scream for help?
Right. Running up a grand staircase while wearing 1920s formal wear is the equivalent of trapping yourself in a funnel.
It's completely counterintuitive to survival. The only forensic justifications for running up the stairs are either that the killer had positioned themselves between Evangeline and the primary exit, actively hurting her upward.
Which is terrifying.
Or her motivation wasn't flight, but rescue. She wasn't running away from the knife. She was running towards someone on the second floor to protect them.
I lean heavily toward the rescue theory. I mean, a mother's instinct,
Yeah.
but the absurdities just compound as the tour moves to the billiard room,
Oh, the billiard room, the hyper-masculine brutalist space with the animal heads and the antique firearms.
where Winston Hope had his throat slit. But the room is missing its centerpiece. There's just this rectangular groove worn into the floorboards where well-heeled shoes used to pace around. The pool table itself is completely gone.
Because Winston died slumped over the felt, the volume of blood from a severed carotid artery would be catastrophic.
Yeah, that's not something you just wipe up.
Not at all. It would soak through the felt, ruin the slate underneath, and completely warp the wood. The table was completely unsalvageable.
Its absence leaves this negative space in the room that is somehow way more menacing than the actual bloodstain on the stairs. You look at the empty floor and just imagine what happened there.
And then Jesse takes Kit across the hall to the library.
Which hits us with the brutal economic reality of Hope's End. It's a stunning room, right? Floor-to-ceiling shelves, a beautiful marble fireplace. Kit admires these 3 exquisite cloisonné vases on the mantelpiece.
Adorned with ivory flowers and ruby-eyed hummingbirds, I think the text says.
Yes, gorgeous pieces. But then Jessie casually corrects her. They aren't vases. They are urns containing the cremated remains of Winston, Evangeline, and Virginia Hope.
And the explanation for why they are still sitting on the mantel is just devastating. Jesse points out a faded, dark rectangle on the wallpaper where an original Winslow Homer painting used to hang.
Right, because Mrs. Baker has been systematically liquidating the estate's assets.
Exactly. Selling the art, the silver, the antiques, just to pay the property taxes and keep the electricity on.
So the urns are still there simply because it is a federal crime to sell human remains.
The murdered family has been literally reduced to unsellable inventory.
That is so dark. It strips away all the romantic Gothic mystique of this cursed bloodline and replaces it with a cold, hard mathematics of a ruined dynasty.
But even the urns don't prepare Kit for the biomechanical impossibility of the final stop on the tour.
The ballroom.
Yes, the ballroom is where 17-year-old Virginia Hope was found. Jesse flips the lights on, revealing these 3 massive, flickering chandeliers.
And the center chandelier hangs noticeably lower than the others. It droops at this severe, really alarming angle.
Because of the infamous nursery rhyme about the murders, the rhyme explicitly claims Lenora hung her sister with a rope.
I really need to pause here and break down the physics of this, because it is the most glaring flaw in the entire historical narrative. Kit looks at that drooping chandelier. Yes, it's low enough to reach if you stand on a chair.
But Virginia wasn't a child.
Exactly. She was 17, described as a robust young woman. Think about the biomechanics required to hang a human being. Dead weight is incredibly difficult to manipulate.
You are dealing with friction, leverage, and sheer gravitational force. A 17-year-old girl like Lenora attempting to overpower her sister is one thing.
But securing a ligature and then hoisting upwards of 120 pounds of dead weight into the air without a sophisticated pulley system or a counterweight, it is physically absurd.
It completely defies human anatomy.
Right. Unless she threw the rope over the chandelier and literally threw her own body weight down in the opposite direction to hoist Virginia up. But even then, tying off the rope while maintaining that tension requires immense upper body strength.
It's highly improbable. The physics dictate that either Lenora had an incredibly strong accomplice, or Virginia was not hung by Lenora at all.
Which brings us to the big question. The impossibility of these crime scenes really forces us to examine Kit's motivations. She is living inside a true crime diorama where the blood is still in the carpet and the prime suspect requires morning oatmeal.
It's a surreal living situation.
I struggle to comprehend why she stays. If you're Kit, surrounded by bloodstains and urns, why stay? The instinct for self-preservation should be screaming at her to pack her bags and walk down that driveway.
Is the sheer desperation for a paycheck overriding her survival instincts?
I mean, poverty exerts its own unique gravitational pull, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. It traps you in environments you would otherwise flee without a second thought. Remember, Kit's professional reputation was completely obliterated.
Right, the euthanasia scandal.
She was blacklisted by the medical community because she was suspected of euthanizing her own mother. The agency gave her this assignment at Hope's End as an absolute last resort. She literally has no alternative shelter or income.
But there has to be more than just economics at play here. I refuse to believe she's just staying for the room and board.
Well, there is a profound psychological mirroring occurring between the 2 women. Kit understands the absolute isolation of being universally presumed guilty. She has lived it firsthand.
Oh, that's a great point.
When she looks at Lenora Hope, a woman condemned by public opinion without a trial, Kit doesn't just see a pariah. She sees a reflection of her own societal exile.
And that shared stigma creates a really dangerous unspoken kinship between them.
Which seamlessly moves us from the silent, preserved house to the silent, preserved woman within it. That kinship sets the stage for the most intense psychological dynamic of the entire narrative.
The typewriter sessions. Lenora is mute, she's confined to a wheelchair, and she only possesses motor control over her left hand. But the silence of the house shatters when Lenora insists on communicating.
And the mechanism she chooses is this archaic, heavy typewriter. The physical limitations of that choice dictate everything about how the story unfolds.
The mechanics of this communication process require a deep dive, because they are incredibly manipulative when you really look at them. Lenora can only strike the keys with one single finger.
She cannot reach the shift key for capitalization.
She cannot reach the punctuation marks. Everything prints as this lowercase, relentless stream of consciousness. But more importantly, she cannot manipulate the paper or the carriage return. She requires Kit's physical intervention to make the machine work at all.
It forces a bizarre, highly physical symbiosis between them. Kit has to sit close enough to feed the paper into the roller, massage Lenora's cramping hand muscles, and physically push the return bar when the little bell dings.
They are practically breathing the same air. When Lenora wants a capital letter, she has to brush her skin against Kit's hand to signal for the shift key. The story literally cannot exist without Kit's active, tactile participation.
It binds the accused and the caregiver together in the literal act of creation. It is a grueling marathon session, hour after hour of Kit facilitating this slow drip of information.
And what does Kit expect? She expects an exoneration. Because if Lenora is innocent, then maybe Kit's own unfair persecution makes sense in the grand scheme of things.
The first few messages really feed that hope, too. Lenora types, "I won't hurt you, you can find out," and things I've never told anyone else.
Kit is the ideal audience for this because she is desperate for a narrative of wrongful conviction. She wants to be the savior who uncovers the truth. But we have to look closely at the power dynamic here.
It's completely lopsided, despite appearances.
Lenora may be paralyzed, but she is the absolute master of the pacing. When Kit gets impatient and demands to know the identity of the killer, Lenora refuses, typing, "I can't tell you yet, because I need to do it in order."
I call out a massive red flag right there.
Right. Lenora is holding the narrative hostage. She is weaponizing the pacing to hook Kit in. She is feeding Kit just enough vulnerability to secure her emotional investment before dropping the anvil.
And the anvil is staggering. Kit expects a plea of innocence. Instead, she transcribes a shocking revelation. Lenora admits that on the night of the massacre, her nightgown was drenched in blood.
And not just that. Furthermore, she admits that she found the murder weapon the missing knife used to butcher her parents, and she threw it over the terrace railing into the Atlantic Ocean.
Let's analyze the cognitive dissonance Kit must be experiencing in that moment. She has invested hours of physical and emotional labor into helping this woman speak, fully anticipating a declaration of innocence.
Only to realize she might be transcribing a confession?
Exactly. She is transcribing the actions of an accessory after the fact, if not the primary perpetrator. Destroying the primary physical evidence of a triple homicide destroys any presumption of innocence.
Why confess to the bloody nightgown? Why confess to hiding the knife? To understand that, we have to look at the psychological architecture of 1929 that Lenora is painstakingly constructing for Kit. She isn't just stating facts.
No, she is building a landscape of generational trauma. She transports Kit back to the inciting incidents of her childhood. We are presented with the devastating image of Lenora's mother, severely addicted to laudanum.
Let's contextualize laudanum for a second because it sounds almost quaint, but it was brutal. It's an opiate tincture heavily prescribed to wealthy women in the early 20th century for everything from hysteria to menstrual cramps.
It creates profound physical dependency and severe emotional volatility.
And the volatility is on full display during Lenora's birthday flashback. Her mother is weeping, swigging directly from the laudanum bottle, and hands Lenora a snow globe featuring the Eiffel Tower.
The mother begs her daughter to go to Paris, to fall in love, to escape the estate, pleading with her, "Promise me you won't remain here."
The snow globe is an aggressive, somewhat on-the-nose metaphor.
It really is. It is a beautifully crafted, sealed, artificial environment where nothing real ever happens. The mother is essentially handing her daughter a physical manifestation of their shared confinement and begging her to shatter the glass.
But the father, Winston Hope, is the true architect of the trauma in this family. The incident following the birthday interaction is incredibly disturbing.
The billiard room scene.
Yes. Lenora goes wandering the house looking for leftover cake and notices the door to the billiard room is open. She peers inside and witnesses her father with a female servant bent over the very pool table he will eventually bleed out on.
Lenora gasps. He spots her, and she flees to hide in the ballroom.
And Winston's pursuit and subsequent handling of his daughter in the ballroom is a masterclass in psychological grooming and manipulation. When he finds her crying on the floor, he does not apologize. He does not explain.
He pivots the entire emotional burden onto her shoulders. He weaponizes her morality.
He asks Lenora if she loves her mother. When she nods, he calmly informs her that if she ever speaks of what she saw, the shock will kill her fragile mother.
He forces a child to become the guardian of his sexual infidelity, framing her silence not as complicity, but as an act of profound familial love. He touches her chin and says, "That's my good girl."
It is emotional blackmail of the highest order. He is ensuring her silence by threatening the life of the parent she actually feels protective toward. And Lenora's typed response to this memory is the pivot point of the entire manuscript.
She types, "But here's the thing, I wasn't a good girl. Not in the least. You'll see for yourself very soon."
I am going to push back incredibly hard on this entire narrative construct right here. I really want to challenge the authenticity of everything Lenora is typing. Think about it. Lenora has been trapped in a wheelchair, staring at the peeling wallpaper of Hope's End for over 50 years.
She's had a lot of time to think.
She hasn't just been passively recalling the events of 1929, she's been authoring them. She has had half a century to draft, revise, and perfect this script in her head.
So you are suggesting the manuscript is a highly calculated fiction.
I am suggesting we're dealing with an incredibly unreliable narrator who is engineering a specific psychological response from her caregiver. How much of this is objective historical fact, and how much is a bespoke narrative tailored specifically to manipulate Kit?
That's a fascinating angle.
Lenora knows Kit was accused of a crime. Lenora knows Kit is vulnerable. What if the trauma, the laudanum, the unfaithful father, what if she is serving Kit a perfectly plated tragedy designed to secure Kit's absolute loyalty before dropping the real confession?
The isolation factor certainly supports your theory. 50 years of solitary confinement inside one's own mind absolutely warps memory. We cannot treat the typescript as a police report. It is a curated performance.
Exactly.
But even if the emotional context is manipulated, we still have to reconcile the physical admissions. I mean, if she's innocent, why invent a bloody nightgown? Why invent throwing the knife into the ocean? Those are specific, self-incriminating details that do not paint her as a victim.
It is maddening. And while these historical secrets are being meticulously typed onto the page, the physical environment of Hope's End is actively generating new lethal secrets in the present day. We have to pivot to the massive, looming absence of the woman who held Kit's job before her.
Mary Milton, the missing nurse.
Mary Milton is the entire catalyst for Kit's arrival in the first place. The official narrative provided by the agency and the estate is that Mary just quit suddenly, abandoning her post in the middle of the night.
But Kit's exploration of Mary's abandoned room shatters that narrative entirely. Let's look at the inventory of what Mary supposedly chose to leave behind.
Okay, let's look at it. Kit opens the dresser drawers and finds them packed with neatly folded, pristine nurses' uniforms. Now, one could argue that if you are quitting a miserable job, you might want a clean break and decide to leave your work clothes behind.
But the inventory extends far beyond uniforms.
Exactly. Wait, let me take that a step further. It's not just work clothes. Kit finds slacks, blouses, and intimate apparel, with Mary's initials written in magic marker on the tags. She finds a heavy box of personal novels on the floor, each inside cover carefully inscribed with, "This book is the property of Mary Milton."
Leaving behind personal novels is strange.
And the most damning piece of physical evidence, Mary left her medical bag.
Let's contextualize the medical bag. For a private duty nurse, the medical bag is not just a tool, it is the physical manifestation of her livelihood and professional identity. It contains her stethoscope, her blood pressure cuff, her instruments.
It's her career in a bag.
You do not intentionally abandon your medical bag unless you are experiencing a total psychological break or you are fleeing a situation in blind primal terror.
Or unless you were removed from the property against your will, without the opportunity to pack. It just screams foul play. But when Kit attempts to investigate this glaring inconsistency, she slams into a wall of aggressive, synchronized denial from the remaining staff.
The staff dynamics here are fascinating. They are engaging in a localized form of groupthink, basically a collective gaslighting campaign designed to neutralize Kit's curiosity.
Mrs. Baker, the housekeeper, is the primary enforcer of this silence. When Kit tries to report hearing footsteps in Lenora's room at night, Mrs. Baker looks at her with utter contempt and blames the coastal wind.
She treats Kit's valid observations as symptoms of hysteria.
But Kit uncovers the hypocrisy of Mrs. Baker's rigid discipline. She discovers the housekeeper is secretly drinking heavily. Carter, the groundskeeper, casually notes that Mrs. Baker regularly consumes 3 glasses of Chardonnay before dinner just to cope with the reality of the house.
The alcohol dependency is a crucial detail. It suggests Mrs. Baker is not merely a strict disciplinarian, she is a woman actively self-medicating to suppress her own awareness of the estate's dark reality. And what about Archie, the cook?
Oh, Archie's so interesting. He's the warm maternal figure in the house, baking fresh blueberry muffins for Kit. But the moment Kit breaches the subject of Lenora and the historical murders, Archie's demeanor completely calcifies.
He turns to ice.
He has known Lenora since she was a child, but he absolutely refuses to engage with the past. The entire staff is bound by an unspoken non-disclosure agreement, enforced by fear rather than legality.
But their denial cannot counteract the physical intrusion of reality. The environment itself begins to violently corroborate Kit's suspicions, culminating in the night terrors and that terrifying sequence on the terrace.
Let's break down the sensory architecture of that night. Kit is lying in bed, listening to the ambient noise of the coastal storm, the wind, the waves battering the cliff. But underneath the chaotic noise of the environment, she detects a rhythmic, intentional sound.
A floorboard creaking inside Lenora's room. The contrast between the chaotic external noise and the deliberate internal noise is highly effective at spiking cortisol.
Kit forces herself out into the hallway. It's empty. She retreats, but the creaking resumes. Driven by this mix of duty and paranoia, she eventually navigates through the darkened mansion and out onto the exterior terrace to observe the side of the house.
And the physical state of the terrace immediately signals acute danger. The ground is literally littered with shattered slate shingles that have plummeted from the roof above.
And among the broken slate, Kit spots a glint of metal in the moonlight. She picks it up. It is a heavy, sturdy metal hook, severely bent out of shape. Think about the tensile strength of an industrial metal hook.
The amount of violent force required to bend iron and rip it from its mounting is substantial. Something incredibly heavy tore that hook down, bringing the slate shingles with it.
While Kit is analyzing the hook, her focus shifts to the exterior window of Lenora's darkened bedroom. She looks up and she sees it, a gray blur, a distinct shadow moving purposefully past the glass. Someone is physically inside the bedroom with the paralyzed woman.
The psychological terror of that realization completely overrides Kit's spatial awareness. She is so fixated on the human threat inside the glass that she forgets the geographical threat beneath her feet.
She takes a step backward in shock. Her heel catches on one of the fallen slate shingles, and she loses her balance. She slams backward into the stone terrace railing. But remember the tilt of the house.
The railing is unusually low, and the ground is sloped toward the cliff.
The metal hook flies out of her hand and disappears into the darkness, and the physics of the fall are terrifying. She flips backward over the low stone wall.
Suddenly, she is suspended upside down. Her stomach is pressed agonizingly into the rough stone edge, while her head, shoulders, and torso dangle over the void.
50 feet below her, the Atlantic Ocean is smashing against the jagged rocks of the cliff face. She describes the sensation of the chasm actively trying to yank her over the edge, as if the void has its own gravitational pull.
It's an incredibly visceral moment.
She has to summon every ounce of adrenaline to lunge sideways, hooking her leg over the stone to drag her center of gravity back onto the solid terrace.
The estate itself is actively lethal. The eroding cliff, the precarious angles, the crumbling masonry, the environment requires constant vigilance just to survive. Kit even notes a massive, newly formed 4-foot jagged crack in the interior wall near the stairs the next day.
Structural integrity of Hope's End is failing rapidly. The house is quite literally tearing itself apart.
And the morning after her near-death experience, Kit is completely unglued. She storms into Lenora's room and issues an ultimatum. She threatens to pack her bags and halt the typewriter sessions entirely unless Lenora admits the truth about the noises.
And Lenora finally utilizes her one working hand to tap out a chilling confirmation. Yes, someone was in the room, but the terrifying part is the addendum. Lenora types, Many nights.
Many nights. The implications of those two words radically altered the threat landscape.
Let me throw my theory at you regarding this intruder. If an unidentified person is systematically sneaking into the bedroom of a mute, paralyzed woman many nights, we have to deduce their motive. Option A. They are intimidating her, standing over her bed to ensure she doesn't reveal a present-day secret to Kit.
A strong possibility.
Option B. They are frantically tearing the room apart looking for an object, perhaps evidence she hid back in 1929. But I lean toward option C. I think Lenora is orchestrating the visits. I think she's using the typewriter or some other method to actively summon an accomplice into the house.
Option C places Lenora back in the position of power. It suggests she is not a helpless victim of nocturnal visitations, but the spider at the center of the web. Regardless of the motive, the environment is functioning as a pressure cooker. No, let's use a better mechanical analogy. Hope's End is operating like a high-speed centrifuge.
A centrifuge. I really like that analogy.
The estate is spinning violently, driven by the isolation, the decaying architecture, and the hidden agendas. And that centrifugal force is pushing the heaviest, darkest secrets to the outer walls, where they are beginning to crack the foundation.
And speaking of stepping outside the centrifuge, we need to discuss Carter. Because right after Kit drags herself back over the terrace railing, her legs turning to jelly, a figure emerges from the darkness. It's Carter, the groundskeeper.
He effectively rescues her from the perimeter of the mansion and leads her across the expansive lawn to his own residence.
The architectural contrast between Hope's End and Carter's stone cottage is absolutely essential to the narrative rhythm. The relief Kit feels upon entering his cottage is palpable.
It is a sturdy, one-story structure. The floors are gloriously plumb and level.
He has exposed wooden beams, colorful throw pillows, and framed Audubon prints on the walls. He's got the World Series playing quietly on a small television. The space is warm, grounded, and undeniably sane. It represents everything the Tilted Mansion is not.
It acts as an airlock, a decompressed zone where Kit can temporarily escape the psychotropic effects of the main house. And in this safe environment, Carter pours her a small measure of whiskey to stabilize her nerves.
But the safety is a complete illusion, because once the whiskey is poured, Carter drops a massive, volatile new variable directly into the 1929 timeline. He presents a bombshell theory that completely upends the official history of the massacre.
We have to analyze Carter's role as the synthesizer of information here. He is an outsider to the historical trauma. He mentions he used to work as a bartender in the local town.
And bartenders occupy a really unique sociological role, don't they? They are the confessors of the working class.
Exactly. They absorb the local lore, the drunken rumors, the generational secrets that slip out after last call. Carter has aggregated decades of town gossip into a highly specific, circumstantial hypothesis.
Carter proposes that the butcher of the Hope family wasn't Winston Hope, and it certainly wasn't 17-year-old Lenora. He believes the true killer was a man named Ricardo Mayhew.
Ricardo was the groundskeeper of the estate in 1929. The circumstantial evidence Carter outlines is highly compelling from an investigative standpoint. Let's look at the timeline.
Right, the night of October 29th.
On the night of the murders, a highly unusual directive was issued. The entire household staff was given the night off. Ricardo's wife, a woman named Bernice, who worked as a kitchen maid, took the opportunity to go into the local town to watch a picture show.
But Ricardo didn't accompany his wife. He opted to remain behind. He was the only member of the staff who stayed on the grounds of Hope's End that night.
And the aftermath of that decision is the crux of Carter's theory. Following the discovery of the bodies the next morning, Ricardo Mayhew vanished. He left no forwarding address, collected no wages, and was never seen or heard from again.
The local police were unable to question him because he had completely evaporated into thin air. Fleeing the jurisdiction on the night of a triple homicide is the universal calling card of a guilty conscience.
And think about his physical capabilities. A grown man whose physical labor involved maintaining a sprawling estate possesses the exact biomechanical strength required to overpower Winston Hope.
And crucially, the brute strength necessary to hoist Virginia's body into the ballroom chandelier.
It neatly resolves the physical impossibilities of the crime scenes. Furthermore, it adds a layer of enduring tragedy to the local community. Carter notes that Ricardo's wife, Bernice, is reportedly still alive, living quietly in the local town decades later.
She never remarried. She has spent half a century waiting for a husband who abandoned her on the night of a massacre.
But the Ricardo theory doesn't just resolve physical impossibilities. It detonates as a psychological bomb when cross-referenced with Lenora's typewriter confessions. Because earlier that evening, before the night terrors, Kit had aggressively confronted Lenora about the name Ricardo Mayhew.
And Lenora's typed response completely recontextualizes her involvement. She doesn't deny knowing him. She types out a vivid memory from 8 months prior to the murders.
She describes a deeply charged, intensely flirtatious encounter on the very terrace where Kit almost died. Lenora, a sheltered teenage girl, is captivated by the young, handsome groundskeeper who boldly approaches her and says, "We haven't been properly introduced. I'm Ricky."
If we accept that Lenora harbored a profound romantic obsession with Ricardo Mayhew, we must completely reevaluate her actions on the night of the murders. If Ricardo slaughtered her family, did she witness it? And if so, why did she not alert the authorities?
Why did she take the bloody knife the murder weapon used to butcher her own parents and hurl it into the ocean? Was she actively covering for the man she believed she loved?
Was her silence born out of a twisted, desperate teenage devotion to protect him from the electric chair? Or worse, was she an active accomplice who helped facilitate his escape?
It weaves a fascinating psychological knot. A teenage girl manipulated by a sociopathic older man into betraying her own family.
I'm going to stop you right there because I vehemently reject the long-term viability of the Ricardo theory. Yes, it solves the physics of the chandelier, but it creates a psychological plot hole so massive you could drive a truck through it.
Outline the discrepancy. I want to hear this.
Let's follow the logic. Ricardo kills the family. Lenora, blinded by love, hides the knife to help him escape. He runs off into the night and is never seen again. Lenora is subsequently blamed for the massacre by the press and the public. She suffers a stroke, becomes paralyzed, loses her voice, and is trapped in a wheelchair inside a decaying, tilted mansion for 50 years.
She is universally despised as a monster, a lifetime of imprisonment.
Wait, let me finish the thought. If Ricardo Mayhew is the killer, and he abandoned her to endure half a century of agonizing paralysis and societal hatred, why on earth is she still protecting him now?
That is a very good question.
What conceivable mechanism of loyalty survives 50 years of complete abandonment? She is an old woman with nothing left to lose. If Ricardo ruined her life and left her to rot, she should have typed his name on page 1 of that manuscript just out of sheer vindictive spite.
That is the critical flaw in Carter's synthesis. Human psychology does not support a half-century of selfless martyrdom for a teenage crush who betrayed you. As Kit notes during her transcription, Lenora explicitly confessed that she knew her parents were dead, she knew her nightgown was covered in blood, and she disposed of the knife.
Why undertake those incredibly incriminating actions if you weren't the one holding the blade? I argue that Ricardo's disappearance is entirely separate from his guilt. Perhaps he witnessed Lenora committing the murders and fled in terror.
Or perhaps Ricardo's guilt is entangled with a secondary secret. A secret Lenora guards even more fiercely than her own claim to innocence.
We are dissecting the theories of a half-century-old crime, treating it as an abstract puzzle. But the brutal, undeniable reality of the present timeline is about to violently assert itself. The theoretical danger of Hope's end is about to manifest as a literal corpse.
The transition from historical speculation to present-day horror is sickeningly abrupt. It is the morning following the terrorist incident. Kit is emotionally frayed.
She has just endured a humiliating phone call with her agency supervisor, practically begging for an extraction, a reassignment, anything to get her out of the house. The agency flatly refuses. She is trapped.
Seeking some sensory regulation, she wanders out onto the terrace. It is daylight, the storm has passed, and it is low tide.
The environment seems deceptively calm. Seagulls are diving. The rhythmic sound of the waves is soothing. Kit walks to the railing, the same railing she nearly fell over hours prior, and gazes down at the narrow 50-foot strip of sand exposed by the receding tide.
She observes what she initially processes as a cluster of rocks jutting out of the wet sand. But the human visual cortex is aggressively wired for pattern recognition, specifically the identification of the human form.
As Kit's eyes focus on the abstract shapes, her brain rapidly reclassifies the visual data. The smooth rock becomes the curve of a skull. The jagged stones resolve into a hand and a foot.
It is a humped, contorted human corpse, half buried by the sediment and tidal patterns.
It is Mary Milton, the missing nurse. The visual shock bypasses higher reasoning entirely. Kit doesn't even have the breath to scream before the visceral reality of a murder scene locks her in place.
The discovery of the body initiates the inevitable arrival of law enforcement, which introduces a terrifying new complication to Kit's survival. The lead investigator assigned to the scene, the man who walks into the sunroom to interrogate Kit, is Detective Vic.
The history between Kit and Detective Vic is toxic. Vic is the exact investigator who handled the suspicious death of Kit's mother. He was the architect of Kit's ruin.
He looked at the evidence, decided Kit had euthanized her mother, and strategically leaked his suspicions to the local press.
He engineered the media circus that got Kit suspended from her profession for 6 months and permanently alienated her from her own father. And now, by some grotesque alignment of fate, he is sitting across from her, evaluating her proximity to a second dead body.
The thematic resonance here is profound. We are witnessing the mechanics of repeating trauma. Kit is trapped in a behavioral loop.
Her mother died of an overdose, officially ruled a suicide, but relentlessly pursued by Vic as a murder committed by Kit. Now, Mary Milton is found dead at the base of a cliff.
And what is Vic's immediate, unshakable conclusion regarding Mary Milton? He boldly declares it a suicide. He informs Kit that his team recovered a suicide note from the pocket of Mary's clothing,
Which Kit's brain immediately rejects based on the empirical data she has gathered over the last 48 hours. We have to dismantle Vic's suicide theory using the physical evidence of the house.
Let's do it.
If Mary Milton walked out onto the terrace and willingly threw herself onto the rocks, what explains the heavy, bent metal hook? What explains the flurry of heavy slate shingles ripped from the roofline?
A voluntary jump is a clean trajectory. The destruction of the terrace environment, the bent iron, the falling slate, indicates a desperate, violent struggle. It strongly suggests Mary was pursued onto the roof or the terrace, attempted to grip a structural hook to save herself. The hook gave way under her weight, and she was violently pushed or thrown into the abyss.
Furthermore, consider the psychological profile of a suicide. Why would a woman planning to end her life take the time to meticulously pack her crisp nurse's uniforms into a dresser drawer, arrange her personal library on the floor, leave her professional medical bag behind, draft a suicide note, place it in her pocket, and then jump?
The staging is clumsy. It reeks of a rushed cover-up by an assailant who didn't know how to properly fake a disappearance. But Detective Vic is incapable of objectively analyzing that evidence because he is suffering from massive confirmation bias regarding Kit.
And more importantly, he is fundamentally compromised by his own history with the estate. This is the twist that truly breaks the narrative wide open. During the interrogation, Kit attempts to defend herself by pointing out the lethal architecture of the house.
She tells Vic the mansion is tilted, that the railing is dangerously low.
And Vic casually places his hand against the slanted interior wall and mutters, "Man, it wasn't like this last time I was here." Kit presses him on that statement.
And Vic casually reveals that in the summer of 1929, the exact year of the Hope family massacre, he worked on the estate. He was a local boy hired by Winston Hope to run errands and perform menial labor around the grounds.
It is a staggering revelation that completely invalidates his authority as an impartial investigator. The detective assigned to solve a present-day death at Hope's End has a direct, lived connection to the historical bloodbath that defines the property.
How is that mathematically possible? Is the local population so small that this is a mere coincidence? Or is the gravitational pull of Hope's End so immense that it is actively dragging everyone connected to the 1929 slaughter back into its orbit?
The centrifuge is pulling the original elements back to the center. Time is no longer functioning linearly within the boundaries of the estate.
Think about the absolute collapse of time we are witnessing right now. The aggressive, hostile detective from Kit's traumatic recent past is simultaneously the subservient errand boy from Lenora's traumatic distant past.
The dead nurse, half buried in the wet sand at the bottom of the cliff, perfectly mirrors the dead family preserved in the cloisonné urns and the dark blood stains at the top of the cliff. I want to leave you, the listener, with a question that reframes this entire investigation.
We have assumed Kit is a bystander trying to solve a 50-year-old historical true crime puzzle. But look at the evidence.
Look at the bloody nightgown, the bent hook, the returning detective. What if Kit hasn't walked into a museum? What if she has just walked through the front doors of a murder plot that started in 1929, hit pause for 50 years, and is now finally violently resuming?
We are diving straight back into the source material on the Hope family massacre today, and specifically we're looking at the deeply disturbing events currently happening at Hope's End.
Right, the third act of this whole nightmare.
Exactly. Our mission for this deep dive is to really analyze the sheer destructive power of withheld truth. We've got a massive stack of notes here detailing Kit McDeara's time as a caregiver, the forensic records of Mary Milton's death, and the intense psychological warfare tearing this mansion apart.
And to really grasp what is happening here. You have to put yourself in that environment. I mean, you have to feel the atmosphere pressing down on these characters.
It is completely suffocating.
It really is. There is this massive rain-soaked storm just battering the coastal mansion. The wind is howling. Water is just streaming down the glass. And inside all of this gloom, Kit takes an enormous, desperate gamble.
Yeah, she brings Detective Vic right into the bedroom of her completely paralyzed patient, Lenora Hope. Detective Vic being the man actively investigating the death of the previous nurse, Mary.
Which is a decision driven entirely by Kit's, her own fraying psychological state, right?
Yeah.
Because up until this exact morning, the fundamental assumption in this house was that Lenora was a prisoner in her own body.
Right. A woman who survived a horrific family massacre decades ago, only to suffer all these strokes that left her in a wheelchair, supposedly stripped of all motor function except blinking.
But Kit has just shattered that assumption.
Yeah.
She spent the entire previous day discovering that Lenora actually retains function in her left hand.
And not just random twitches either.
No, fluid movement. Lenora used that hand to type out coherent sentences on an old typewriter. So Kit genuinely believes she has just secured the ultimate star witness.
She assumes, logically, if Lenora can communicate, then Lenora can definitively prove whether Mary Milton jumped to her death or was actually pushed.
Exactly.
So Kit rolls the wheelchair up to the desk. She feeds a fresh sheet of paper into the carriage, places Lenora's hand on the keys, and basically tells the detective, ask her anything.
Now imagine you are Detective Vic in this scenario.
Oh, man, you'd be so done with it all.
You're already heavily skeptical of Kit, right? You know she's carrying this immense baggage. She was suspended from her last job because her own mother died of an overdose under her care.
Which is just an awful thing to carry.
It is. So Vic is essentially looking at a severely traumatized woman who is trying to force a paralyzed woman to solve a murder. It looks unhinged.
But he humors her, right? He stands awkwardly on this floor that is literally slanted because the mansion's foundation is rotting into the ocean. And he asks Lenora when she last saw Mary.
And the expectation here, of course, is this sudden dramatic unburdening of the truth, like a movie scene.
Right, the big confession.
But human behavior, especially in these environments just steeped in historical trauma, it rarely operates like a neat courtroom drama. Faced with the detective, Lenora doesn't type a confession.
She doesn't type a clue either.
No, she completely fakes total motor incompetence. Her hand just hovers aimlessly, her eyes go entirely blank, and she lets her hand drop so limply that it only strikes a single meaningless letter. Just an 8.
It's like a hostage negotiator suddenly realizing the hostage is the one holding the detonator.
That is a perfect way to put it.
Kit is absolutely devastated. She places her own hand over Lenora's, pleading with her, asking if she's just overwhelmed by the police presence.
And beneath Kit's palm, Lenora just balls her hand into a useless little fist and weakly thunks the keyboard.
And Vic just completely loses whatever tiny shred of patience he had left.
Oh, yeah. He assumes Kit is playing this sick, elaborate game to distract from her own professional failures. He literally drags Kit into the hallway.
Tells her to call him when she decides to live in reality, and then he just storms out of the house.
We really need to analyze the profound inversion of power that just occurred in that bedroom, though. Because visually, physically, Lenora is the weakest entity in the house.
She requires round-the-clock aides to feed her, bathe her, change her. She's completely infantilized by her condition.
Right. Yet, by selectively withholding her capacity for language, she is the one dictating the entire reality of Hope's end. Information is literally the only currency left in that mansion, and Lenora controls the mint.
That is such a wild dynamic.
By refusing to type, she single-handedly neutralizes the police presence, discredits Kit, and maintains the hermetic seal around all of the house's secrets.
Okay, but let's unpack this for a second. Why deliberately sabotage the only person trying to help you? I mean, Kit isn't just an employee. She is actively trying to clear Lenora's name and prove the previous nurse didn't abandon her.
Well,
I look at this and I have to conclude that Lenora is terrified, not of the detective, but of whoever else is residing in that house. Like if the police suddenly know she can communicate, the killer knows too.
that's a really fair read, but it assumes Lenora views Kit as an ally rather than just an instrument. We have to look at the psychological mechanics of what Kit herself is experiencing here.
You mean the trauma projection?
Exactly. Kit is suffering from profound trauma projection.
Right.
Her mother died of an apparent suicide that Kit feels she failed to prevent.
Right.
That unresolved guilt, that ambiguous grief, it is completely hijacking Kit's current reality. She is subconsciously transmuting Mary Milton into her mother.
So if Kit can prove Mary was
Then
murdered.
she doesn't have to face the crushing reality of suicide.
Yeah.
Exactly. She needs Mary to be a victim of circumstance, not despair.
Wow. So Lenora's refusal to type doesn't just embarrass Kit in front of a cop, it violently rips away this psychological scaffolding Kit has built to survive her own grief.
Exactly. And the second the detective's car pulls away, that scaffolding is mocked. Kit marches back into the room, understandably furious, and just drops all professional decorum.
She straight up curses at her patient.
She does. And Lenora, without missing a single beat, casually lifts her left hand and flawlessly types, "I'm sorry."
Ugh, the cruelty of that immediate pivot is staggering.
It really is. The storm outside is rattling the windows, creating this incredibly claustrophobic soundscape, while inside, the silence is just punctuated by the sharp clack of those typewriter keys.
It forces Kit to realize that the disability isn't just a medical condition anymore, it has become a theatrical performance.
Yes. So Kit demands to know why she did it. And Lenora types that her ability to communicate has to be a secret from, quote, everyone.
Which, is the kind of crucial caveat you might want to share before your nurse stakes her entire professional sanity on a demonstration for the police.
You'd think so, right? Yeah. But Kit adapts pretty quickly. If the police are off the board, Kit basically becomes the interrogator herself.
Right. She starts asking Lenora how Mary was acting in the days leading up to her death. And Lenora types this single, bizarre portmanteau. She types, "We're nervous."
Weird and nervous merged into one state of being.
That's such a creepy word.
It's a highly specific linguistic choice that reflects this creeping, inescapable dread. I mean, what would make an experienced professional caregiver descend into a state of weird nervous paranoia?
Because Mary wasn't some fragile rookie. She was a seasoned nurse. And Kit actually remembers a conversation with Jessie, the young maid who helps around the house.
Right. Jessie had casually mentioned that Mary was scared of the dark energy in Hope's End.
So Kit asks Lenora directly, what was Mary scared of?
What?
And Lenora types, "My sister."
Referring, of course, to Virginia Hope, the sister who was slaughtered in 1929 and whose malevolent ghost supposedly haunts the upper floors of the mansion.
But this is where Kit's modern rationalist mindset completely clashes with the Gothic mythology of the house.
She just entirely rejects the supernatural premise, doesn't she?
Oh, absolutely. She essentially tells Lenora, look, your sister has been dead for 50 years. Ghosts don't write manuscripts. Cut the act.
Because Kit has a piece of evidence she's been holding back.
Right. She saw this covert Polaroid photograph that Jessie took. It showed Mary leaning over Lenora in the dark, hovering over this very typewriter.
And everyone in the house just assumed Mary was doing fine motor skill therapy with Lenora.
But physical posture in a photograph rarely lies. Like you said earlier, therapy implies instruction. But hovering over someone in the dark, that implies transcription.
Exactly. Kit deduces that Mary wasn't treating a patient at all. She was taking dictation from a witness.
And when Kit calls her out on this, you actually see the physical toll the lie is taking on Lenora. Her eye twitches, the muscles in her face start to spasm.
Kit asks, "You were telling her your story, weren't you?" And Lenora just taps the key for yes.
Think about the isolation Kit must feel right there. She genuinely thought she was the first person to break through Lenora's silence. She thought she was special.
And instead, she realizes she is just the replacement typist.
Ouch, yeah.
But the scale of this secret project is really what escalates the stakes from a tragic accident to a systemic cover-up. Because through their typed conversation, Lenora admits that she and Mary had been working on this manuscript for weeks.
Weeks.
Yeah. And when Kit asks how much of the truth she gave Mary, Lenora's response is absolute. She types, everything.
Everything. The entire unvarnished reality of what happened on the night the Hope family was butchered.
The definitive answer to a 50-year-old true crime obsession.
Who held the knife, what the motive was, the exact sequence of events. Mary held the keys to one of the most infamous unsolved mysteries of the 20th century.
And you know what the most chilling part is? Kit asks when they actually finished typing the story. And Lenora types, the night she left.
The timing completely obliterates the possibility of a coincidence. I mean, you do not finish transcribing a confession to a historical mass murder and then hours later spontaneously decide to throw yourself off a cliff.
Exactly. The completion of the manuscript was the catalyst for Mary's death. It has to be.
But so Kit just starts tearing her own bedroom apart. Because her room used to be Mary's room, right? And Lenora claims Mary hid the pages in there.
So Kit is pulling out drawers, checking under the mattress, looking behind the radiator.
Finding nothing. But then she looks at the closet floor. And amidst all the dust and the grime of this decaying mansion, there is this perfect, clean rectangle on the floorboards.
A negative space that acts as undeniable forensic evidence. It's the exact dimensions of a standard travel suitcase.
Which completely rewires the logic of the night Mary died. Think about it. If you are deeply depressed and you intend to end your life by jumping into the ocean, you do not pack a suitcase, carry it to the terrace railing, and take it over the edge with you.
It is totally absurd.
Right. Kit realizes Mary was packing to flee. She was going to take the manuscript, get out of that house, and expose the truth from a safe distance. But someone intercepted her.
Kit's evolution here is really fascinating to watch. She transitions from this sort of passive victim of circumstance into an active amateur sleuth.
She immediately calls Detective Vic again, in the middle of the night.
And she presents this suitcase theory. She argues that because Mary's clothes and toiletries were left behind, the suitcase must have contained something else of immense value, the manuscript.
Right. Therefore, the person who wanted to stop the manuscript from leaving the house pushed Mary over the railing and disposed of the suitcase.
But Detective Vic just shuts her down with this clinical, institutional coldness. He brings up the physical forensics of the death.
He points out that pushing a grown fighting woman over a railing is incredibly difficult without leaving a trace.
And we have to look at the biomechanics of what Vic is arguing there. He cites the coroner's report. Mary's body exhibited no defensive wounds whatsoever.
None.
None. No skin under the fingernails, no bruising on the forearms that would suggest she tried to ward off an attacker. The blunt force trauma was entirely consistent with a high-velocity impact against the exposed beach below.
But Kit argues that the railing on the terrace is bizarrely low. I mean, it hits an adult right at the lower back, which creates a massive tipping hazard. It wouldn't take a prolonged struggle. It would just take one hard, unexpected shove in the dark.
True. But Vic counters with the ocean currents. He notes that low tide was at 2 a.m. If she fell into the water, she would have washed away, but she had dry sand. And the police scoured the entire beach and the shoreline. They found no suitcase. They found no scattered papers. So Vic's conclusion is just that Kit is manufacturing a murder mystery because she can't process the reality of suicide.
Vic really represents that systemic failure to listen to those closest to the trauma. It's like finding out the person who just accidentally fell off a boat was holding the only copy of a treasure map. You have to ask, who else knew she had the map?
Exactly. But he relies purely on the absence of physical evidence to dismiss the presence of a psychological motive. He accuses Kit of wasting police resources and hangs up on her.
Which severs Kit's last tether to the outside world. She is officially trapped inside the ecosystem of Hope's End, knowing a killer is sleeping down the hall, and the police will not come if she screams.
It's terrifying. So if the authorities won't help, Kit realizes she has to find the manuscript herself.
Or, well, more accurately, she needs to figure out what was in the manuscript that was actually worth killing over.
Right, and this leads her to Carter, the groundskeeper.
Carter lives in this small, crumbling cottage on the edge of the property. He's always been this quiet, somewhat brooding presence. But when Kit confronts him, Carter finally decides to pull back the curtain.
He reaches under his mattress and pulls out a hidden envelope.
And inside that envelope is a piece of photographic evidence that fundamentally destabilizes everything the public thought they knew about the 1929 massacre.
It's a sepia-toned photograph from September 1929, discovered by a previous groundskeeper in the abandoned servant quarters above the garage.
When Kit looks at this photo, it literally takes her breath away. It is Lenora Hope, but not the paralyzed, silent woman in the wheelchair, and not the stoic, formal heiress from the famous oil paintings.
No, this is a candid shot.
Lenora is lounging on a divan, her expression is softened, and her hands are resting protectively over a very clearly rounded stomach. She is pregnant.
6 months pregnant, to be exact, just 1 month before her parents and sister were brutally murdered.
We really need to consider the socioeconomic reality of 1929 here. The Hope family was old money. They were deeply obsessed with optics, social standing, legacy.
Oh, absolutely. An out-of-wedlock pregnancy was not just a minor scandal. In their circles, it was viewed as a catastrophic moral failure that could literally ruin the family's entire standing.
And the existence of this child entirely changes the geometry of the murders. I mean, the public narrative had always been that it was an inexplicable act of madness, but this photo introduces a terrifyingly clear motive.
It shifts the crime from random slaughter to a crime of passion, shame, and desperate preservation.
And Carter doesn't just present the photo as historical curiosity, does he?
No, he presents it as his own origin story. He reveals the true reason he took a job at this decaying estate. Carter believes he's the direct descendant of the child in that photograph.
He traces his lineage back to a baby boy who was abandoned on a church doorstep on Christmas Day, 1929.
And the timeline aligns perfectly. A 6-month pregnancy in September means a birth in late November or early December.
But the real bombshell is who Carter believes the father was. He points to Ricardo Mayhew.
The young, working-class groundskeeper who was employed by the Hope family at the exact time of the murders.
This introduces such a volatile class conflict into the narrative. Carter's theory is that Ricardo and Lenora were engaged in a forbidden, deeply unbalanced affair. The wealthy heiress and the hired help.
Right, and when the pregnancy could no longer be hidden, the Hope parents likely intervened. Carter suspects they either threatened Ricardo, attempted to pay him off, or demanded he take Lenora away and marry her in disgrace.
So Carter theorizes that Ricardo snapped under the pressure, that he murdered the parents and the sister to escape their control, or maybe out of sheer resentment for how he was treated, and he spared Lenora only because she was carrying his unborn child.
The tragic irony of Carter's life is just profound when you think about it. He has spent years searching for a sense of identity, a connection to a family tree.
Yeah, he intentionally sought employment at Hope's End, literally stepping into the exact same job role as his supposed grandfather, Ricardo.
He came looking for a grandmother. He came looking for his roots. And instead, he has walked blindly into a modern-day cover-up.
Think about what it means to tie your identity to a place like Hope's End. Carter actually admits to Kit that when he finally met Lenora, when he finally looked into the eyes of the woman he believed was his flesh and blood, he felt absolutely nothing.
No spark of recognition, no familial warmth, just a cold, paralyzed stranger.
But feelings aren't enough. Carter needed empirical proof. And this is where he confesses to an act that completely changes our understanding of Mary Milton's murder.
Right. Carter reveals that he wasn't just a passive observer waiting for Lenora to confess. He actively recruited Mary into a conspiracy.
He knew Mary had gained Lenora's trust. He knew they were working on the typewriter. So Carter convinced Mary to perform a deeply unethical, covert medical procedure.
He asked her to draw a vial of Lenora's blood.
Because Carter had already banked his own DNA at a lab. He just needed a sample from Lenora to run a definitive paternity test, and Mary had agreed to do it.
And the night Mary died was the exact night she was supposed to draw that blood.
Suddenly, it clicks for Kit. She remembers something from her very first day on the job. While she was bathing Lenora, she noticed a fresh, dark, purple bruise in the crook of Lenora's left arm.
A puncture mark.
A hematoma consistent with an amateur venipuncture. Mary actually succeeded. She drew the blood.
Which means that the suitcase Mary was allegedly trying to sneak out of the house didn't just contain a manuscript detailing a 50-year-old murder. It contained a literal vial of blood that could legally dismantle the entire Hope estate.
We really have to unpack the immense financial implications of this DNA test. I mean, who currently stands to inherit Hope's End and the remaining family fortune when Lenora dies?
Well, in the absence of a direct biological heir, the estate would almost certainly default to the people who have dedicated their lives to her care.
That would be Mrs. Baker, the fiercely protective head housekeeper, and Archie, the seemingly gentle cook and caretaker.
They have been at Hope's End for decades. They have sacrificed their own independent lives to maintain this crumbling mausoleum.
Precisely. If Carter's DNA test proves he is the legal, biological grandson of Lenora Hope, he instantly bypasses Mrs. Baker and Archie. He becomes the sole rightful heir.
The financial motive for murder snaps into sharp focus right there. The killer wasn't just trying to suppress a story. They were protecting their inheritance. If Mary leaves that house with the blood sample, Mrs. Baker and Archie lose everything.
So Kit realizes she is living with the prime suspects. She decides she needs to test the waters to see how deep the denial goes in this house. She finds Archie in the kitchen.
Archie, who is usually this warm, grandfatherly figure who brings up the meal trays and offers quiet smiles.
Kit approaches him casually and asks a direct question. She just says, "Did Lenora ever have a baby?"
The psychology of Archie's response is incredibly telling. A man who has lived with this family since 1929 knows every whisper, every secret.
But Archie doesn't hesitate. He doesn't feign ignorance or suggest it was a rumor. He looks Kit dead in the eye and says, "Never."
It is a flat, unblinking lie.
And it confirms to Kit that the staff is actively engaged in a massive coordinated cover-up. They are guarding the perimeter of Lenora's history with their lives.
And this psychological pressure cooker is perfectly mirrored by the physical deterioration of the environment itself. While Kit and Carter are having this revelation in his cottage, the very ground beneath them gives way.
Oh, the imagery here is spectacular and terrifying. They hear this deafening structural groan. The earth literally vibrates.
They run outside into the storm, and they watch as a massive, multi-ton section of the cliff face
The land sitting right between the mansion's terrace and Carter's cottage.
just violently shears off and collapses into the roaring ocean below.
It is a brilliant physical manifestation of the collapsing narrative. The foundation of Hope's End is eroding, much like the lies protecting the family.
And the physical danger forces a logistical change that really heightens the thriller aspect of the story. Carter's cottage is no longer safe. He is forced to move into the main mansion.
So now, every single piece on the chessboard is trapped under one leaking roof. Kit, the paralyzed witness, the illegitimate heir, and the two caretakers who might be murderers.
It's a classic locked room mystery setup, but the room is actively falling into the ocean.
Kit's paranoia begins to completely spiral. Every floorboard that creaks, every shadow in the hallway feels like a threat. She knows that whoever pushed Mary over that railing is aware that Kit is now asking the exact same questions Mary was asking.
The environment becomes fundamentally hostile. The boundary between external threats and internal psychological manipulation begins to completely dissolve.
We see this manifested when the tension first boils over from an outside source. Late at night, Kit hears a noise and walks out of her room to find Mrs. Baker prowling the dark, winding corridors of the house.
And Mrs. Baker isn't just checking the locks. She's carrying a literal double-barreled shotgun.
It is a deeply unsettling image. The two of them look out the window toward the foggy, rain-slicked lawn, and they see flashlight beams darting through the mist.
It is a group of local teenagers. The mythology of Hope's End, combined with the recent highly publicized death of Mary Milton, has turned the estate into this macabre tourist attraction for thrill-seekers.
The outside world is literally encroaching on the sanctuary. So Mrs. Baker throws open the heavy front doors, levels the shotgun at the fog, and screams at them to get off the property.
The kids scatter in terror.
But one of them pauses at the edge of the tree line, and Kit recognizes him. It's Kenny.
Right, a local boy she actually had a brief, regrettable, romantic fling with before she took this job.
Kenny looks up at the towering, dark facade of the house, specifically at the window he knows belongs to Lenora, and he screams a single word. He yells, "Killer!"
And then the other unseen boys in the fog take up the chant, echoing it through the rain, "Killer, killer."
It's a visceral, acoustic assault that reminds everyone inside the house of exactly how the town views them. But for Kit, Kenny's taunt plants a highly toxic seed of doubt.
Because Kenny later warns Kit to be careful. He implies that the town doesn't necessarily believe the staff killed Mary.
Right. The town believes that if Lenora Hope was capable of slaughtering her entire family in 1929, maybe she hasn't lost her touch.
Kenny suggests the fifth impossible suspect. What if Lenora killed Mary?
Logically, medically, it is absurd. A woman confined to a wheelchair who requires a mechanical lift just to be moved into a bed cannot overpower a healthy nurse and push her over a railing.
But paranoia doesn't respect logic. Once the seed is planted, Kit begins to rigorously question everything she thought she knew about Lenora's physical limitations.
Kit basically turns into a forensic scientist in her own right. She remembers an incident from a few days prior. Lenora had been listening to a cassette tape on a Walkman. Kit had left the room, and when she returned, the Walkman was turned off.
At the time, Kit assumed it was a glitch.
Now she views it as a crime scene. Kit goes into Lenora's empty room and meticulously examines the Walkman. She is testing the physics of accidental activation.
Right, she wants to know, can a person with only the use of a left hand, sitting at a specific angle in that wheelchair, accidentally trigger the stop button on that specific device?
So Kit jostles the table. She tries bumping the machine with her elbow. She tries knocking it against the armrest of the wheelchair. She tries every conceivable angle to mimic an involuntary spasm from Lenora's left arm.
And what is the result?
It is physically impossible. The button requires targeted downward pressure from an angle that Lenora's left hand just cannot reach.
Which leaves only one empirical conclusion. The machine was turned off deliberately, using the supposedly paralyzed right hand.
The medical diagnosis of total right-side paralysis is a lie.
Imagine the horror of that realization.
You have been bathing this woman, feeding her pureed food, changing her undergarments, believing she is entirely helpless, and she has been letting you do it. Why?
Why would anyone subject themselves to the profound daily indignity of total physical dependence if they didn't actually have to?
The sheer discipline required to maintain that deception for years is psychopathic. It implies a level of patience and manipulation that is almost unfathomable.
If she is faking the paralysis, the wheelchair is not a prison. It is the ultimate camouflage.
This realization pushes Kit to the absolute brink. And the climax of this psychological warfare happens later that exact same night. Kit is asleep in Mary's old bed.
Deep in the night, she hears a heavy, distinct thud coming from Lenora's room next door.
Kit rushes in, her heart pounding, but she finds Lenora seemingly fast asleep, the room completely undisturbed. Kit convinces herself she is hearing things. She goes back to bed.
But an hour later, she is jolted awake by a terrifying noise. It's the harsh, mechanical buzzing of Lenora's emergency call alarm.
A sound designed to pierce through sleep and signal immediate distress. Kit throws open the adjoining door, and the scene in the room is pure nightmare fuel.
Lenora is awake, rigid in her bed. Her mouth is open in a silent, gurgling moan of pure terror.
Her eyes are saucer-wide, completely fixed on the desk across the room. Kit follows her gaze. There is a fresh, crisp white page rolled into the carriage of the typewriter.
And typed on that page, over and over and over again, is a single sentence. It's all your fault.
It's all your fault, repeated down the page.
We really have to appreciate the profound psychological violence of this act. Someone has taken Lenora's only secret method of communication, the very tool who uses to unburden her soul, and turned it into a weapon of terror.
The killer has invaded her most private sanctuary while she lay defenseless in the dark and left a physical manifestation of threat.
Kit rips the page out of the machine. She looks at the terrified old woman and says, "Let me guess. Your sister typed this."
And Lenora, shaking, taps twice on the bed rail. Yes, she is still clinging to the ghost story.
But Kit is done playing games. The next morning, Kit goes on the offensive. She gathers the entire household. Mrs. Baker, Archie, Carter, and Jessie.
She forces them all into Lenora's bedroom. This is the moment Kit tries to seize control of the narrative. She holds up the typed page. She doesn't just ask who did it, she demands a confession.
She is scanning them, looking for the micro-expressions of guilt. Jessie, the young maid, immediately starts twisting her bracelets, looking like she's about to cry.
Carter's eyes are darting nervously between Kit and Mrs. Baker, utterly terrified that Kit is going to blurt out their secret DNA plot.
Archie remained completely stoic, just a brick wall of silence. But Mrs. Baker executes a masterclass in psychological manipulation.
She employs classic, devastating gaslighting. She doesn't yell. She doesn't act defensive at all.
She calmly puts on her reading glasses, looks at the page, and then looks at Kit with an expression of profound, chilling pity.
Mrs. Baker softly suggests that no one broke into the room. She suggests that Kit typed the page herself.
She tells the room that Kit is clearly suffering from severe stress, that she is desperate for attention, and that she is mentally unraveling.
And then Mrs. Baker twists the knife. She draws a direct comparison between Kit and Mary Milton.
And she says, Mary started seeing things too. Mary started acting erratic and paranoid right before the end, and look what happened to her.
It is a brilliant, multifaceted attack. On one level, it isolates Kit from the rest of the staff, framing her as an unreliable, hysterical woman.
On another level, it is a direct, undeniable death threat, disguised as medical concern. She is telling Kit, if you keep digging, you will end up exactly like Mary.
And it works. Kit has to back down. She can't reveal the truth about Lenora's ability to type, and she can't reveal the truth about the blood sample without putting herself and Carter in immediate lethal danger.
She is silenced by the very people she is trying to investigate.
Which leaves us to consider the ultimate architecture of deception in this house. If you are listening to this and putting yourself in Kit's shoes, you have to weigh the probabilities.
You have a missing manuscript that details a massacre. You have a missing vial of blood that dictates a fortune. You have caretakers who are willing to weaponize your own trauma against you.
And sitting in the center of it all is Lenora Hope, the woman who might be paralyzed or who might be orchestrating the most elaborate long con in history.
I think the most crucial detail to examine is the specific phrasing on that page in the typewriter. It's all your fault.
Syntactically, it is ambiguous. If Mrs. Baker or Archie snuck into the room and typed it, the message is an external threat regarding Mary Milton.
They are telling Lenora, Mary is dead because you opened your mouth and tried to tell your story. Her blood is on your hands.
But what if we apply Kit's Walkman theory? What if no one broke into the room? What if, in the dead of night, Lenora Hope rose from that bed, used her fully functional right hand, and typed that page herself?
If Lenora typed it, the meaning shifts entirely. Is she typing it to scare Kit away, staging a haunting to force Kit to quit before she gets herself killed.
Or is the message internal? Is Lenora sitting in the dark typing a message to herself?
It's all your fault. Is she confronting her own crushing guilt over the forbidden romance with Ricardo, the baby she lost in 1929, the family that was slaughtered because of her secret, and the nurse who was murdered trying to help her?
We are left questioning the fundamental nature of the villain in this story. Is the monster the person desperately hiding a secret to survive, or the person relentlessly digging it up?
Imagine holding a woman's most cherished possession, like a 50-year-old snow globe containing a delicate miniature of Paris.
Right, which was a final gift from her murdered parents, if I remember correctly.
Exactly, her absolute last connection to them.
Yeah.
And imagine looking her right in the eyes and dropping it on purpose.
Oh, wow. That's just brutal.
It really is, just dropping it to see if her paralyzed hand will, twitch to catch it. That is the kind of psychological warfare we are dropping you into today.
It's terrifying, honestly, because we're looking at a diagnostic landscape that is entirely warped.
Right, because usually when you're dealing with a medical condition, you expect a certain level of, mechanical precision.
A binary.
Yeah, you break a bone, an x-ray shows the jagged white line, the doctor points to it, and you have your answer. Broken or not broken, it's clean.
Well, it provides an illusion of control, I mean. We desperately want the human body to behave like a machine, where you can just lift the hood, find the faulty wire, and say, oh, there's the problem.
But that completely falls apart here.
Oh, absolutely. When you step into the world of severe trauma, neurological lockdown, and this intense, almost claustrophobic relationship between a caregiver and a patient, that X-ray machine shatters.
Literally and figuratively.
Right. What we're analyzing in these sources is the sheer danger of applying a pass-or-fail test to profoundly complex psychological trauma.
So, to set the stage for you, we're looking at Kit, a caregiver isolated in this decaying cliffside mansion called Hope's End.
Which is an incredibly oppressive environment.
Very, and she's looking after Lenora, a woman who is completely paralyzed except for her left hand. Oh, and Lenora also happens to be the prime suspect in her family's brutal 1929 massacre.
Which completely warps the dynamic. I mean, Kit isn't just taking blood pressure readings anymore.
No, she's essentially acting as a warden, a detective, and a nurse all at once. And Kit has convinced herself that Lenora is faking her paralysis.
Or at the very least, exaggerating it to avoid facing justice.
Exactly. So, driven by this intense paranoia and the sheer isolation of this crumbling house, Kit decides to run a test. But it's not a medical test.
It's an ambush, a crude, brutal ambush.
It really is. Kit holds out this Parisian snow globe, the only untouched relic Lenora has left, and she holds it right over the edge of the mattress.
And her internal logic is chillingly simple.
Yeah, she thinks if Lenora really wants to save this irreplaceable object, her survival instincts will override her deception.
She'll just naturally reach out with her supposedly paralyzed right hand to catch it.
Right. But the audacity of that assumption requires us to really look at caregiver burnout.
Well, yeah. Kit is attempting to force a physiological response by leveraging immense emotional trauma, and it's a profound misunderstanding of how the nervous system processes shock.
How so?
Well, the medical reality of paralysis, especially conditions like conversion disorder, where extreme psychological stress manifests as genuine physical paralysis, it means the body doesn't just snap out of it because something precious is falling.
Right, it's not a light switch.
Exactly. And the source material paints this incredibly suffocating image. Kit and Lenora are locked in this silent stare-down.
Watching the gold flakes settle.
Yes. The tension in the room is just pulling all the oxygen out, and then Kit simply lets go.
And the physical mechanics of that moment are just devastating. The globe doesn't just fall, it smacks dead against Lenora's unmoving palm.
Oh, God.
Yeah, it rolls off the mattress, hits the floor, and shatters. The miniature Eiffel Tower inside is violently snapped in two. Just a jagged stump of gold.
And Lenora's reaction?
Well, she can't speak, she can't scream, she can't move her body to react, so she lets out a single tear.
Wow. And that single tear fundamentally restructures the entire power dynamic of the room.
How do you mean?
Think about the physical staging. Kit initiates this cruel experiment from a position of absolute physical dominance. She's standing over the bed, she has full mobility, she controls the environment.
So it holds the object of power.
Exactly. She's dictating reality. But the microsecond that glass breaks and that tear falls, the moral high ground instantly, violently reverses.
Kit's plan just collapses.
Completely. She's forced to confront the fact that she just sadistically destroyed the last emotional anchor of a trapped woman.
I have to stop you there, though, and push back on Kit's logic. Because I'm struggling to understand how she ever thought this was a viable strategy.
I mean, she was desperate.
Right, but compare Kit's test to a scientist running a maze experiment. You set up the cheese, introduce the shock, record the data. It's clinical. But it's as if Kit realizes only after she flips the switch that she isn't dealing with a lab rat.
She's dealing with a human being experiencing profound grief.
Exactly. Even if we grant Kit her paranoia was destroying the woman's most prized possession, literally the only way to test this theory.
It's an extreme leap.
It is, and the immediate aftermath is just pathetic. Kit is on her knees in the stilled water and gold glitter, frantically trying to sweep up the glass, literally begging for forgiveness.
It's entirely pathetic, but, you have to view it through the lens of the environment. Hope's End isn't just a setting. It's an active participant in this psychological decay.
It makes people crazy.
It breeds a very specific brand of desperation. Kit is terrified because she strongly suspects Lenora might have been involved in the recent, highly suspicious death of the previous nurse, Mary.
Right. The stakes are life and death for Kit, too.
Exactly. Fear makes people rationalize immense cruelty. Kit convinces herself that this binary test, catch the globe, you're a liar, drop it, you're truthful, is an objective necessity.
But human minds don't operate on binary switches.
No, trauma can lock a body down completely. By breaking the globe, Kit doesn't gain a single piece of medical clarity. All she does is shatter the incredibly fragile trust they had.
So what are the consequences of that broken trust? Because Lenora's reaction is brutal in its minimalism.
She gives her the silent treatment.
The absolute silent treatment. And when you're dealing with a patient who can only communicate by tapping a single working finger, the withdrawal of that one finger is a profound act of defiance.
It's her only weapon.
Yeah. Kit is practically tap dancing around the room trying to make amends, offering to read books, play audiobooks, apologizing for the 5th time, and Lenora gives her absolutely nothing, just a cold, blank stare.
It is a masterclass in passive resistance, and it's a tactic you only learn if you've been forced to survive in incredibly hostile environments.
You don't just pick that up anywhere.
No. Lenora has spent 50 years trapped in a body she can't control, locked inside a house she can't leave, while being universally suspected of murder. She knows exactly how to weaponize silence.
It's her only currency.
Right. And if you want to understand where a person learns that kind of tactical survival, the source material forces us to look backward.
To 1929.
Yes, plunges us straight into the memories of a teenage Lenora long before the paralysis.
And that transition from the present-day silence to the deafening noise of 1929 is jarring. Talk about dysfunctional family dynamic.
It's a war zone.
We're pulled directly into the memories of a 17-year-old Lenora. She and her sister, Virginia, are huddled in the hallway, eavesdropping outside their mother's bedroom door. And inside, glass is literally shattering against the walls.
The shattering glass in 1929 is a brilliant, sharp, thematic echo of the snow globe breaking in the present.
Well, that's a great point.
In both timelines, the sound of breaking glass signals the violent destruction of an illusion.
Right, because inside that room, the parents, Winston and Evangeline Hope, are having the most vicious fight of their marriage. Winston reveals the family's financial empire is secretly collapsing.
They're facing imminent foreclosure.
Yes, the firm is going under. And his proposed solution is to drain his daughter's trust funds to artificially inflate the business.
To save his own reputation.
Exactly. And Angeline, who the text notes is heavily sedated on laudanum, utterly refuses. She screams, "Over my dead body."
Which is a piece of dialogue that carries a suffocating amount of dark irony given the massacre that's about to unfold.
Seriously.
But look closely at the mechanics of this argument. It strips away the aristocratic veneer and exposes the purely transactional nature of their marriage.
Winston accuses Evangeline of being a narcissist. She fires back about his decades of infidelity and horrors.
It's a marriage built entirely on leverage and mutually assured destruction. And then Winston drops the absolute atomic bomb. He says to his wife, "I know why you married me. Just like I know that Lenora isn't my daughter."
Wait, if you put yourself in teenage Lenora's shoes for a second, crouching outside that door,
it recalibrates your entire reality.
Your fundamental identity, your safety, your place in this opulent world is all vaporized in a single sentence. She gasps so loudly she thinks they heard her.
And Virginia's reaction.
Virginia has to clap a hand over Lenora's mouth and drag her into a dark adjoining room to hide. And Winston actually comes out into the hallway.
Proudly in the dark.
Yes. calling out, "Are you there, my dear and my darling?" in this low, menacing voice. It's stripped straight out of a Gothic horror.
Let's unpack the sociological gravity of that moment for a young woman in 1929. She's an illegitimate child in a hyper-elite family that trains exclusively on bloodline and reputation.
Illegitimacy wasn't just a scandal back then.
No, it was a total social and financial death sentence. And look at Virginia. Virginia doesn't comfort her. In the dark, Virginia just sneers and whispers, "Well, now you know where you get it from, and you're not the only slut in the family."
Which brings us to the terrifying secret Virginia holds over Lenora's head. Because young Lenora isn't just dealing with the shock of her parentage.
She has a much more immediate problem.
Yeah, at 17 years old, she is 6 months pregnant by a servant named Ricky. And Winston, her supposed father, has noticed her gaining weight.
But he doesn't act like a parent. He acts like a livestock manager.
That's exactly it. He puts her on a diet so aggressively strict that she's practically being starved while her body is desperately trying to grow a baby.
Oh. The mechanical horror of being laced into a corset and denied food while pregnant is just agonizing.
It's physical torture.
It's institutionalized structural abuse masked under high society propriety. Winston's primary concern isn't her health. It's the visual maintenance of her girlish figure.
She's an asset to him.
Right. She needs to remain a viable commodity for a strategic marriage to save his company. Lenora is trapped in an absolute patriarchal vice grip. Her body belongs to the family's reputation.
And the revelation that Winston isn't even her biological father?
That's the catalyst. That severs the very last thread of familial obligation.
It totally changes the paradigm of her desire to run away.
Mm-hmm.
Running away with Ricky isn't just some Romeo and Juliet teenage rebellion anymore.
It's biological survival. She needs calories. He needs maternity clothes.
She needs a doctor who won't report her to Winston. So, operating purely on survival instinct, she goes to the only person she thinks might protect her, her mother.
But when she gets there,
Evangeline has just consumed an entire bottle of laudanum.
let's pause and discuss the specific use of laudanum here, because it adds a massive layer of historical context.
Yeah, what exactly was it used for?
Laudanum was a tincture of opium widely prescribed to women in the Victorian and Edwardian eras right into the 1920s. It was essentially used as a chemical restraint.
To pacify them.
Exactly. To pacify women deemed hysterical, difficult, or simply inconvenient to their husbands.
Wow.
And the text leaves Evangeline's overdose chillingly ambiguous. Was it an accidental overmedication? The family physician claims it was an accident later, but of course he would, to protect the reputation.
Or was it a highly intentional suicide attempt?
Yeah.
Triggered by Winston's threat to steal the trust funds.
Right. And right before Evangeline slips into this opioid coma, she gives Lenora one final piece of information. She tells her she never actually loved Winston. She loved someone else, a servant.
And Winston found out, paid that man a fortune to run away, and trapped Evangeline in the marriage.
Which is an exact, terrifying parallel to what Lenora is currently experiencing with Ricky.
History is actively swallowing her whole...
The trauma is deeply generational. And with her mother comatose and her sister acting as a hostile threat, Lenora is left with zero allies in a house that wants to erase her.
But this is where we see the birth of the strategic mind Kit is dealing with in the present.
Yes.
Lenora displays this tactical brilliance that is genuinely astonishing for a starving 17-year-old. She realizes pity won't work. She needs leverage.
She needs a discreet adult.
And she targets the one adult with the most to lose, Miss Baker.
Which is a brilliant narrative connection.
Right, because Miss Baker is the very same woman running Hope's End as the terrifying elderly warden in the present day.
But back in 1929, she's the family tutor, the paragon of manners and strict rules.
And Lenora catches Miss Baker sneaking out of the sunroom, hurriedly smoothing down her skirts, mere seconds after Winston leaves that exact same room.
She just listened to her father admitting to having affairs and outwalks her prim, deeply religious teacher.
It's a phenomenal subversion of the adult-child power dynamic. Lenora doesn't confront her with moral outrage. She corners her and demands logistical help.
Maternity clothes, extra food, and secrecy.
And Miss Baker's initial reaction is to laugh, dismiss her as a foolish, hysterical child.
But Lenora doesn't flinch.
No. She simply pulls her dress tight against her pregnant belly to provide physical proof and calmly threatens to expose Miss Baker's affair to Bernice Mayhew, the biggest gossip on the staff.
She bypasses emotion and goes straight to mutually assured destruction.
She blackmails her own teacher. You have to wonder how that interaction shaped the next 50 years of their lives.
Oh, definitely. The woman ruling over paralyzed Lenora today was once entirely at a teenage Lenora's mercy.
It explains the incredibly toxic web of dependency between them. Mrs. Baker isn't just caring for a patient, she's guarding the person who knows her deepest shame.
It establishes the core thematic mechanism. Information is the ultimate, unregulated currency at Hope's end. Winston uses money, but Lenora learns that secrets buy compliance.
Which brings us perfectly back to the present day, where Lenora, despite being completely paralyzed, is still actively running the information economy of the house.
Right. Let's look at the bedroom scene.
Kit is still desperate for forgiveness after the snow globe disaster. She winds a blank page into the heavy manual typewriter and places Lenora's working hand on the keys.
And Lenora, breaking her punishing silence, types a single rule-breaking word,
Outside.
which is a direct challenge to the established order. Going outside is strictly forbidden by Mrs. Baker.
Supposedly for logical reasons, the weather, the crumbling cliff, Lenora's health.
But Lenora isn't asking permission. She's negotiating a trade. She knows Kit's weakness. Kit is obsessed with solving the death of Mary, the previous nurse.
So Lenora types her bribe. I'll tell you what happened to the baby.
And Kit takes the bait instantly.
She waits for the perfect window. She waits until everyone else leaves to attend Mary's funeral. The situational irony is thick there.
Very. Using a murdered truth seeker's funeral as a distraction to seek the truth?
Exactly. Kit wheels Lenora out into the gorgeous October sunshine. The sensory contrast must have been overwhelming. And out on the terrace, via a primitive system of tapping 1 tap for no, 2 for yes, Lenora reveals the heartbreak of 1929.
The revelation is devastating precisely because of its brevity.
The baby was born.
Yes.
It was a boy, yes. He was taken away immediately.
Yes.
And she has no idea what happened to him. No.
It's a sterile, binary way of communicating profound biological trauma.
Kit also uses this to confirm her forensic theory. Kit suspects Mary drew Lenora's blood to prove that Carter, a young worker at the house, is actually that long-lost baby's son.
Making him Lenora's biological grandson.
Yes, Lenora confirms this. She also confirms she told Mary the identity of the 1929 killer. But when Kit demands Lenora tell her the rest of the murder story,
Lenora refuses. 1 tap. No.
look at this psychological gamesmanship.
Lenora is meticulously parceling out her trauma. She gives Kit just enough high-value information to keep her compliant, but fiercely retains the core secret as leverage.
She's physically powerless, but strategically dominant.
She got her sunshine, delivered a morsel of truth to pay for it, and now she's unilaterally closing the bank.
But Kit completely loses her composure. She's exhausted and furious. She decides to force the issue through sheer physical willpower.
She goes for the typewriter.
She runs inside, sprints up the service stairs, and grabs this massive cast-iron manual typewriter. And I really want to emphasize the grueling physical mechanics here.
The text makes you feel every ounce of it.
Kit is carrying this incredibly heavy, awkward metal beast down a narrow, unlit staircase. Her muscles are turning to jelly. She has to bend her neck at a painful angle and use her chin as a literal paperweight to keep the blank pages from flying out.
It's a fantastic physical manifestation of the psychological burden she's taken on.
Like Sisyphus pushing the boulder.
Or a deep-sea diver dragging a massive iron anchor down, hoping the pressure doesn't crush them before they get answers. She's operating entirely on the sunk cost fallacy.
She has to get the confession to make the exhaustion worthwhile. She finally makes it to the terrace, fully expecting to force Lenora to write. But when she breaks through the door,
He's completely busted.
the timing is catastrophic. The funeral party's returned early. Mrs. Baker, Archie, Carter, Jessie the maid, they're all staring at Kit, holding this massive typewriter.
And Mrs. Baker's reaction is incredibly telling. She doesn't scream.
She doesn't berate Kit in front of the staff.
No, her reaction is chilling in its absolute calmness.
Mrs. Baker just walks over, takes the heavy typewriter from Kit's arms without a word. The blank pages fly away in the coastal wind, and Mrs. Baker carries the machine to the stone railing,
And heaves it over the edge.
drops it into the churning Atlantic Ocean below.
It's an act of profound, calculated symbolic violence. By destroying the typewriter, she's actively, physically silencing Lenora.
Ensuring the historical secrets are permanently drowned.
It's a highly effective display of ultimate authority.
And it leaves Kit utterly defeated. She assumes she's fired, she trudges back up to pack. But before she leaves, she checks the metal lockbox under Lenora's bed, where they hid the pages Lenora had already typed out.
The slow, agonizing confession of the 1929 murders.
Oh, wait. Kit opens the box. It's completely empty. The pages are gone.
which fundamentally alters our understanding of Mrs. Baker's awareness. She's been conducting silent surveillance.
She knew about the secret typing.
She let Kit believe she was operating in secret, only to pull the rug out at the exact moment of maximum psychological impact.
Kit marches downstairs and finds Mrs. Baker in the massive dining room. And the visual contrast is wild. Mrs. Baker is sitting alone, calmly sipping a glass of red wine, staring into the roaring fireplace.
And resting in the ashes
Are the scorched, blackened remains of Lenora's typed confession. She burned the only written record of the truth.
The psychology of burning the pages while calmly drinking wine is fascinating. Controlled destruction.
When Kit accuses Mrs. Baker of torturing Lenora, Mrs. Baker counters with this defense of martyrdom. She says she sacrificed her life out of devotion to keep Hope's End standing.
And then she drops the legal bombshell.
She reveals she has a legally binding agreement. When Lenora dies, Mrs. Baker inherits Hope's End, the land, the cliff, everything.
Multi-million-dollar coastal real estate.
Even with the house crumbling, the land is worth a fortune.
This is the pivot point. It introduces a massive, tangible, thoroughly modern financial motive. Because if Mary, the dead nurse, was actively trying to prove Carter was the biological grandson,
Her inheritance is in critical jeopardy.
exactly, a verified grandson could easily contest that agreement in court.
He'd have a legitimate blood claim. If Mary had the blood samples and the typed confession, she wasn't just a nuisance. She was a direct, multi-million-dollar threat to Mrs. Baker's retirement.
It provides Mrs. Baker with a direct, lethal motive. It suddenly makes perfect sense that Mrs. Baker caught Mary, struggled with her on the terrace, and pushed her over the edge to protect her inheritance.
The blood on the rocks wasn't an accident. It was asset protection.
Right.
Kit realizes she might be locked in a house with a very pragmatic killer, and the house itself seems to react to all these secrets bubbling up.
Yes, the structural collapse.
Kit makes a wildly reckless decision. She sneaks into Mrs. Baker's private bedroom to find Mary's missing suitcase of evidence.
Sneaking into a suspected murderer's room is an insanely dangerous move.
Pure desperation. But she doesn't find the suitcase. She finds shoeboxes stuffed with photographs. Pictures of a young, beautiful Mrs. Baker in Paris with a handsome fiancé, drinking champagne, laughing on a boat.
A stark reminder that this terrifying warden used to have a real, joyful life.
She had a future, and she sacrificed it to stay trapped at Hope's End for the promise of this massive inheritance.
It humanizes her, but it also underscores how desperately she wants that payoff. She's sunk 50 years into this. She has nothing else to lose.
And right as Kit is looking at these photos, Mrs. Baker comes stumbling back down the hall, clearly drunk. She aggressively cranks up a gramophone, blasting loud music.
Kit has to hide.
She dives into a massive wooden armoire, surrounded by stiff black funeral dresses. Mrs. Baker reaches for the brass handle. Kit is seconds away from being caught. And then, the earth gives way.
The sensory details here perfectly capture the physics of a geological collapse. The record player violently skips, the loud music cuts out, replaced by this terrifying, guttural groan from deep in the foundation.
The entire house violently heaves, cracks, and shifts. Kit is tossed around inside the armoire like a body in a coffin, plaster is raining down.
It feels like an earthquake, but it's the cliff face finally surrendering to the ocean.
The physical foundation perfectly mirroring the narrative foundation. Everything collapsing at once. When the shaking stops, they rush out to the terrace. The geological damage is catastrophic.
A massive fault line.
2 inches wide, unfathomably deep, ripped right across the stone terrace. It splits the empty swimming pool in half. A huge chunk of the cliff edge has literally fallen into the ocean. The mansion is teetering on the brink.
One more storm and it goes into the Atlantic. And look at the psychology of the staff afterward. Jessie, the maid, takes one look, walks inside, and immediately packs her bags.
I'm not going to be here when it goes.
The only rational response. But Kit refuses to leave.
Kit's obsession has completely overridden her survival instinct. She claims she can't abandon a paralyzed woman, but internally she admits she's staying because the truth is right at her fingertips.
But her logistical nightmare is, how does she communicate now? The typewriter is at the bottom of the ocean.
Kit spots an object on Jessie's dresser. A Ouija board.
It's a brilliant, desperate pivot. A Ouija board is an occult tool designed specifically to communicate with the dead.
Which makes the irony staggering. Kit is using an object designed to talk to ghosts and placing it on the wheelchair tray of a living woman who has been artificially silenced.
She's trying to resurrect a conversation with someone treated like a ghost by the house.
Exactly. Kit places the planchette under Lenora's working finger, and the flow of information is immediate. Kit asks about the financial ledger she found, about Bernice Mayhew, the loudmouth gossip from 1929.
And Lenora spells out a definitive word, Nasty.
Then Kit asks why Mrs. Baker is secretly paying Bernice every month. Lenora slides to the numbers. 1929.
1929, the year of the massacre?
Kit does the math. Bernice has been paid over $600,000 across her lifetime. When Kit asks why, Lenora spells it out. Because she knows.
The ultimate confirmation of hush money. Someone is using the Hope fortune to pay off witnesses.
Kit realizes she has a living witness she can actually speak to. She drives straight to the Ocean View retirement home to confront Bernice.
And Bernice is a piece of work.
Sitting in her sterile room watching Wheel of Fortune radiating bitterness, Kit accuses her of taking hush money to cover up Lenora's scandalous affair with Ricardo the servant.
But Bernice violently corrects that narrative. She admits to taking the money, but her eyewitness account of the murders completely upends everything Kit thought she understood.
Bernice details the night of the murders. She says she was looking for Ricardo, walked into the kitchens of Hope's End, and found teenage Lenora.
And the sequence of events is crucial.
Very specific. She says that before a scream rang out upstairs, and before Lenora grabbed a butcher knife and ran up the stairs, Lenora already had blood on her hands.
The forensic implications are massive. The official theory was that a single killer grabbed the kitchen knife, went upstairs, and murdered the family.
But if her hands were covered in blood before she picked up the weapon?
It shatters the single weapon theory. It implies violence already occurred elsewhere, multiple killers, or a totally misunderstood sequence of events.
Bernice's theory is that Lenora batted her big blue eyes at Ricardo, brainwashed him into helping slaughter her abusive family, and then murdered Ricardo too.
Shoving his body off the terrace, neatly explaining why he was never found.
But there's another crucial piece. Bernice confirmed she was fired the week after the murders. But the person who delivered her very first hush money check was the 18-year-old kitchen boy, Archie, the exact same Archie who still cooks their meals today. He was the bagman. He delivered the bribe that bought Bernice's silence.
The corruption infects the entire staff. Everyone is compromised.
Kit's brain is spinning. She leaves the nursing home unsure of who is the victim and who is the predator, and right in the hallway she runs into Detective Vick.
The cop who refuses to believe Mary was murdered.
Right. He adds gasoline to the fire. He tells Kit about a glaring discrepancy in the 1929 police dispatch report. The caller, assumed to be Lenora, told the dispatcher that 2 people were dead.
But when police arrived, they found 3 bodies, Winston, Evangeline, and Virginia, who was hanging from her chandelier.
If Lenora made the call, why report 2 deaths if there were 3 bodies?
It strongly suggests Virginia was still alive when the call was made. The killer hung Virginia after the police were summoned.
And the police found Lenora outside on the terrace in the freezing rain, aligning with Bernice's theory that she just shoved Ricardo's body over the edge.
Kit pivots back to believing Lenora is a mastermind killer. But then Vic makes a fatal error. To prove Mary committed suicide, he shows Kit a photocopy of the suicide note found in Mary's pocket.
The note is incredibly brief. I'm sorry, I'm not the person you thought I was.
But the forensic linguistics blow the case open. Look at the typography.
It's typed entirely in lowercase letters. Every single word. 0 punctuation, no period, no apostrophe.
And the realization hits her.
That specific typing style is exactly how Lenora communicates on her manual typewriter. Because she only has one hand, and the shift key mechanism on her machine is broken, she physically cannot capitalize letters or use upper-tier punctuation.
Mary didn't type that note. It was typed on Lenora's machine, inside Hope's End.
The ultimate typists tell. An undeniable mechanical fingerprint. It proves the note was manufactured to cover up a murder.
Triggering an avalanche of epiphanies for Kit.
She races out, driving recklessly back to the mansion. Her mind loops back to Bernice's exact description of the girl who seduced Ricardo.
Bat those big blue eyes at him and he was a goner.
Kit tears through the front doors, down the dusty hallway, and slides to a halt in front of the massive family portraits. The oil painting shrouded in thick black silk crepe since 1929.
The visual execution here is cinematic.
Kit takes her metal car key, grips it like a knife, and physically tears away the shroud of history. She slashes the fabric covering Winston, then Evangeline, and finally, Virginia.
Kit
stares up. Virginia, haughty, cruel Virginia, is painted with striking, icy blue eyes.
Wow.
Kit turns to the portrait of Lenora. And the young girl in the painting, the woman Kit has been caring for,
Mm.
has vivid green eyes.
The paradigm completely shatters. Biologically, eye color is an undeniable phenotypic trait. You cannot fake it.
The girl having the scandalous affair, the girl who was 6 months pregnant and begging for maternity clothes, the girl who supposedly brainwashed a man to mass murder, wasn't Lenora, it was Virginia.
It turns the established motive completely upside down. The secret pregnancy, the illicit affair, none of it belonged to Lenora.
So what was Lenora doing that night? Was she covering for her sister? Taking the fall for a tragedy she didn't initiate? Cleaning up the bloody aftermath of a fight between Virginia and her parents?
It casts every memory in a new, sinister light. When Virginia sneered, "You're not the only slut in the family," we assume she was taunting Lenora about Lenora's pregnancy.
But she was projecting, using her illegitimate sister to deflect from her own terrifying secret.
If history misidentified the catalyst for this massacre based on a detail as small as eye color, the implications are staggering.
It demands that we look at how easily history is manipulated by survivors. Imagine spending weeks judging a paralyzed woman based on a fundamentally flawed story.
It's a chilling thought.
If a century-old narrative of guilt and mass murder can be entirely flipped by a splash of blue paint on forgotten canvas, what other historical facts in our own lives are built on mistaken identity? If a single detail like eye color can rewrite a century of blame, how can we ever truly trust the stories we are told about the past, especially when the tellers have 600,000 reasons to lie? Imagine standing in the dimly lit, cavernous kitchen of Hope's End. Your heart is just hammering against your ribs, like a frantic rhythm that perfectly matches the groaning of the actual architecture around you.
Oh, absolutely. The tension it's just suffocating at this point.
It really is. You've just bypassed the service stairs because the physical tension in this wildly tilting, literally decaying mansion has reached an absolute boiling point. You step into the kitchen, a space defined by these long shadows and, the oppressive silence of isolation. And there she is.
Right. The woman you've known for months.
Exactly. The woman you have known for months as Mrs. Baker, the subservient, perpetually quiet caretaker. And what is she doing? She's casually uncorking a bottle of Cabernet on the counter.
Which is so jarring.
It looks like a perfectly normal evening ritual, but it's not. Kit knows it's not. Kit's eyes immediately lock onto that corkscrew because it is sharp, utilitarian, and in this specific, highly volatile context, it is incredibly dangerous.
Yeah, Kit doesn't want a sharp object anywhere near this woman.
But she absolutely recognizes the necessity of having one in her own pocket. So operating purely on adrenaline, she smoothly swipes the corkscrew right off the counter, slides it into her pocket, and just slaps a piece of paper onto the heavy wooden table.
The notes.
The alleged suicide note. The exact piece of paper Mary Milton supposedly typed out before she went over the cliff. Our mission today for this deep dive is to take a magnifying glass to the psychological labyrinth of Riley Sager's source material and deconstruct how a single lie, planted in 1929, can just mutate and consume an entire family over 54 years.
And that note is really the perfect artifact to start with, because it is the thread that unravels the entire tapestry. Detective Vic, representing this blunt instrument of institutional authority, he was entirely certain that note proved Mary took her own life.
Just a neat, tragic bow on a messy situation.
Exactly. But Kit has been living in that house. She knows the unique, halting cadence of the typewriter upstairs. She knows the lack of capital letters, the absence of punctuation. She realizes that no one types with that specific rhythm except the paralyzed, mute woman confined to the bed on the second floor, which means the note was typed by her.
It wasn't a suicide note at all.
No, it was an apology note from a prisoner, completely misinterpreted by the police to fit their preferred narrative.
So Kit lays this undeniable physical proof on the table, and then she forces the revelation that fractures the entire reality of Hope's End. And for you, the listener, if you haven't fully assembled the puzzle pieces yet, this is the moment the ground drops out from under you.
A massive twist.
The massive twist. The woman standing in the kitchen, the woman holding the wine glass. She isn't Mrs. Baker. She never was. She is Lenora Hope, the real Lenora Hope.
Which is just wild to wrap your head around.
Which means the paralyzed, mute woman upstairs, the woman everyone in the world has been calling Lenora, the supposed mass murderer, is actually her sister, Virginia Hope.
And the psychology of this immediate aftermath is what truly anchors the scene for me. When a deception of this magnitude is finally exposed, a 54-year charade, Human behavioral science dictates that we should expect an explosion,
Right, like a panic attack or a frantic denial.
Exactly, a collapse or a sudden burst of violent self-preservation. But Lenora, the real Lenora, exhibits none of those. She just scans the note, she pours her glass of wine,
Wow.
her posture shifts, becoming entirely rigid, and she pastes on this forced, chilling smile. And Kit realizes in that exact second that Lenora is perfectly mirroring the uncovered portrait of herself that hangs in the hallway.
That is so creepy.
It really is. This isn't just a woman caught in a lie. This is a masterclass in severe compartmentalization. She has worn a mask of subservience for so long that when Kit finally rips it off, there isn't a vulnerable human underneath. There is just another meticulously painted mask.
The mask of the untouchable Hope heiress. But I have to challenge the idea of it just being compartmentalization, though, because isn't this bordering on a complete dissolution of identity?
How do you mean?
Well, how does a human mind sustain a 54-year lie? We are talking about over half a century of acting as the hired help in your own ancestral home, while simultaneously forcing your sister to live under your name.
Under the stigma of being a murderer, yeah.
Bearing this immense, crushing societal stigma. You don't just compartmentalize that. You have to actively rewrite your own reality every single morning when you wake up.
You're touching on the necessity of cognitive dissonance for survival there. To understand how she sustains it, we have to look at the architecture of the lie, which was built in 1929. We can't view her through the lens of a mature adult, right? We have to look at a 17-year-old girl.
Right, the historical context.
The historical and economic context is vital here. It's the immediate aftermath of the 1929 stock market crash. The Hope family business is virtually worthless overnight. Her parents are lying dead in a pool of blood downstairs.
And her sister is upstairs, essentially comatose.
Yes, from a botched hanging attempt. And the surrounding society, the police, the fleeing servants, the townspeople, have all collectively decided that Lenora is the monster who committed the massacre. She is entirely isolated, terrified, and backed into a desperate corner.
I hear what you're saying about survival instinct.
But
the solution she engineered is identity theft on a Gothic, almost predatory scale. It goes beyond just hiding. She actively commodifies her sister's tragedy.
Oh, that is the precise mechanism of the deception. It's ruthlessly pragmatic. Lenora understands the legal framework of her grandparents' trust fund, which was insulated from the Wall Street crash.
So the money is still there.
Yes, and Virginia, as the older sister, is legally entitled to a massive portion of it. But Virginia must be alive to claim it. Or, more accurately for Lenora's purposes, Virginia needs to be legally dead so the entirety of the fortune defaults to Lenora.
Wow. So she looks at her sister, whom Dr. Walden incorrectly declared brain dead, and she doesn't see a sibling in mourning.
She sees a logistical hurdle.
And her solution to that hurdle perfectly encapsulates the corruption of wealth in that era. Because she doesn't argue with the doctor or seek a second opinion. She bribes him.
Yep, plain and simple.
And she doesn't just hand him cash. She takes him out to the estate's garage, points to her late father's fleet of luxury Packard cars, and tells the doctor to take his pick.
She even throws in a second luxury vehicle for his wife.
It's breathtaking.
Yeah.
She purchases her sister's death certificate, literally legally erasing a human being for 2 cars. It just exposes how malleable truth was in 1929 if you had the capital to purchase it.
And the lack of forensic oversight in the 1920s made this entirely plausible. A doctor's word was absolute. So the bribe works flawlessly. Virginia is legally declared dead, and Lenora inherits millions of dollars.
And then she just leaves.
She abandons the trauma of Hope's End, flees to Paris, immerses herself in the vibrant expatriate culture, lives in luxury, mingles with artists. She even gets engaged to an American serviceman.
She actively steals and lives the exact life of freedom and romance that Virginia had always desperately dreamed of.
Exactly. It's only when World War II begins to brew in Europe that her sanctuary collapses, forcing her back to the Maine coast. And she returns assuming the identity of Mrs. Baker.
The family tutor who had vanished on the night of the murders. So the real Lenora adopts the camouflage of a servant, while the paralyzed Virginia is permanently sentenced to live out her days as the infamous, shunned pariah, Lenora Hope.
Now, Lenora tries to frame this as an act of mercy, doesn't she? She claims she did this to protect Virginia from the primitive, brutal state institutions of the 1930s.
But looking at the mechanics of what she did, it operates exactly like a parasitic relationship. It isn't a rescue, it's a hijacking. By faking Virginia's death, Lenora doesn't just protect her from an asylum. She strips Virginia of her identity, her legacy, and any potential future.
She takes everything.
Lenora gets the Parisian cafes and the romance, while Virginia gets a locked room and the public hatred meant for a butcher. It's a custom-built prison, and Lenora installed herself as the warden, funding her own lavish escapes with the prisoners' money.
It is the ultimate rationalization of the abuser, honestly. Lenora convinces herself she's the savior, sparing her sister from electroshock therapy or lobotomy, which were very real threats back then.
Very real.
By framing herself as the benevolent protector, Lenora absolves herself of the guilt of the theft. But the reality is she required Virginia's continued existence in silence to maintain control over the narrative and the wealth.
And the physical decay of Hope's End mirrors this rotting moral foundation perfectly. The house is collapsing into the ocean precisely because it cannot support the weight of this monumental deception.
Right. And to truly understand the weight of that deception, we have to look at the foundation itself. We have to strip away the 54 years of rumors and look at the unvarnished truth of what actually happened on the night of the massacre in 1929.
Because the blood on the grand stairs didn't come from a place of cold, calculated malice. It came from a place of profound, primal trauma.
Shifting our analytical focus to the night of the murders fundamentally changes the genre of the story. We move from a classic locked room mystery into a devastating exploration of patriarchal control and maternal grief.
Let's start with the absolute isolation of Virginia. She is the golden child of the Hope family, and she is pregnant out of wedlock, which in 1929 high society was viewed not as a medical event, but as a moral failing that could ruin a family's social standing.
Completely ruin it.
On the night of the murders, her labor comes on with terrifying speed. She doesn't even make it to her bed. She gives birth on the literal hardwood floor of her bedroom. I want you to really visualize the visceral horror of this. There are no doctors, no sterile environments.
Just pain and fear.
She is writhing in agony, knocking her head against the wall in pain, creating a literal puddle of blood and sweat on the floor.
Yeah.
It is in a moment of extreme physical vulnerability, compounded by the psychological terror of having to hide her agony from her own father.
The medical realities of a concealed, unassisted birth in that era carry an incredibly high mortality risk. When Lenora and the real Miss Baker finally rush in to assist, the panic is palpable. I mean, the umbilical cord isn't clamped and cut with surgical scissors.
No. Lenora has to run to the kitchen and fetch a heavy butcher knife to sever the connection.
And that specific detail, the butcher knife, is such a heavy, ominous piece of foreshadowing. It takes an instrument of domestic violence and inserts it directly into the sacred act of birth.
It's horrifying. But amidst all that blood and panic, there's a profound emotional pivot. Virginia looks at her newborn son, and she experiences an overwhelming, transformative surge of maternal love.
A brief moment of joy.
She states that her life finally has a purpose, that she would endure any suffering to protect this fragile life. It is the singular, purest moment of joy she has ever known.
Which makes the subsequent destruction of that joy so deeply traumatic, because the psychological whiplash is instantaneous.
Her father, Winston Hope, enters the room. Winston, who has been pacing in the adjacent room, entirely detaching himself from his daughter's physical ordeal, walks in. He doesn't offer comfort.
Of course not.
He looks at his daughter, bleeding on the floor, and he looks at his newborn grandson, and his face registers absolute, unadulterated disgust. He immediately orders Lenora to remove the child.
He explicitly states he will not allow a bastard to soil his family lineage.
Virginia, whose body is entirely broken from the labor, is reduced to begging. She pleads just to hold her child for a moment.
We have to analyze Winston's behavior not just as cruelty, but as the ruthless enforcement of 1920s patriarchal capitalism. For men of his stature, reputation was a tangible currency.
Right. A scandal could affect credit lines.
Exactly. Credit lines, social standing, business partnerships. Winston's obsession with maintaining the facade of the Hope family name completely overrides any biological imperative or paternal empathy.
He views the baby as a toxic asset that must be liquidated.
Yes. He goes so far as to threaten to throw the newborn off the cliff directly into the ocean if his orders aren't followed immediately.
So Lenora, paralyzed by her father's tyrannical authority, takes the child. The baby is squirming, instinctively reaching out toward the sound of his mother's cries. Virginia, fighting through the physical shock, reaches back. And they are allowed exactly 1 second of physical contact.
1 second.
Just their fingertips brushing together.
Right.
1 second of connection before her child is carried out of the room, out of her sight, and out of her life.
And Winston's method of dealing with the problem relies on the only tool he respects, which is capital. He intercepts the real Miss Baker in the hallway. He doesn't appeal to her morals, he appeals to her wallet.
He just hands her a massive sum of cash.
Cash and the keys to a luxury Packard, instructing her to take the child across the border to Canada and never return. Miss Baker, attempting to rationalize her complicity, assumes this is a temporary exile until Winston's temper cools.
But Winston's intent is total and permanent erasure. He is forcibly disappearing his own grandson to protect his social equity.
It's chilling.
I really want you, the listener, to inhabit Virginia's psychological space in this moment. You are physically incapacitated, bleeding out on a hardwood floor. The child you just carried for 9 months has been physically ripped from your arms by your own sister.
Your father has just treated you with less humanity than a stray animal.
You are entirely powerless. The emotion that would fill that void isn't just sadness. It is a blinding nuclear rage. When you view Virginia's subsequent actions through the lens of a mother whose child was stolen while she watched helplessly, her march down the stairs doesn't look like madness.
No, it looks like the most justified, rational reaction possible. It entirely reframes the narrative of the Hope family murders. The tragedy wasn't the result of a sudden psychotic break or a greedy grab for inheritance.
It was the explosive, uncontrollable manifestation of grief.
It was the violent rejection of a patriarchal system that treated women and children as disposable property.
Fueled entirely by that grief, Virginia forces her shattered body off the floor. Her legs are buckling, her core is tearing with pain. But she is propelled by an absolute singular determination. She sees the bloody butcher knife left on the nightstand, the very blade used to sever her connection to her child, and she grips it.
She drags herself out into the long, dark hallway and begins her descent down the grand stairs.
And the visual symbolism of her descent is striking. As she moves down the stairs, she passes the massive oil portraits of the Hope family, painted by Peter Ward. We have to look at the composition of those paintings. They weren't painted as a unified family group.
Right, each member was painted individually.
Later hung together. Virginia realizes in that moment that Ward unintentionally captured the absolute truth of her family. They are 4 strangers, utterly isolated from one another, each trapped within their own gilded frame.
They're a collection of individuals performing the roles of a family. And Virginia, gripping the knife, is making the active choice to break out of her frame. She refuses to perform anymore.
She reaches the ground floor and moves toward the billiard room, drawn by the sound of voices. She hears her father, Winston, asserting his usual dominance. But the second voice stops her cold. It's Ricky,
The boy she loves.
the father of the child that was just stolen from her. She walks into the room, heart pounding with a desperate final shred of hope. She demands to know where her baby is. Winston calmly informs her that Miss Baker has taken the child away. Virginia immediately turns her focus to Ricky.
This is the moment she expects the romantic ideal to materialize.
She expects Ricky to stand up to Winston, to declare his love, to say they are leaving together to reclaim their son.
But Ricky's reaction shatters the romantic illusion completely. He refuses to meet her gaze. He stares fixedly at the intricate patterns of the rug. Why? Because the economics of the situation have already been settled. Ricky accepted a bribe.
He took the money.
Winston offered him $25,000, a life-altering fortune for a working-class boy in 1929, to walk away and pretend the affair and the child never existed. And Ricky took the money. His loyalty wasn't to Virginia, and his paternal instinct didn't exist. His primary motivator was financial upward mobility.
It is a devastating, soul-crushing betrayal. And Winston isn't just facilitating this. He is reveling in it. He is boasting about how cheaply he was able to purchase Ricky's silence, actively humiliating his bleeding daughter. That is the breaking point.
She snaps.
Virginia snaps. She raises the heavy butcher knife and lunges forward. She doesn't even have a specific target in mind. She just wants to inflict the agony she's feeling onto the men who destroyed her. But before the blade can connect, a hand firmly grasps her wrist, stopping her momentum.
It's Evangeline, her mother.
Evangeline is such a fascinating character study in this deep dive. Throughout the narrative, she is described as a ghost in her own home. She is perpetually in a daze, medicated or dissociated, completely detached from the reality of her family's cruelty. But at this exact moment, the fog lifts.
It's like she wakes up.
She appears with terrifying, crystal-clear lucidity. She gently pries the knife from Virginia's fingers, telling her, "They're not worth destroying your young life over." She collapses against Virginia, weeping, absorbing her daughter's pain. But Evangeline's intervention isn't an act of pacification.
No, it is a pivot toward the true violence of the night. This is where the historical cycle of the Hope family is laid bare. Evangeline turns to her husband, Winston, and delivers a line that rewrites their entire marital history. She says, $50,000, Winston, your price has gone up. If I recall, you only offered $25,000 to make the man I loved go away.
I'm going to pause on that because it's a massive structural shift. Winston didn't just invent this tactic for his daughter. He utilized the exact same playbook on his wife a generation prior.
Precisely. It exposes the generational cycle of control. Winston forced Evangeline to abandon her true love, using financial leverage to force her into a marriage that served his ego and social standing. He commodified his wife, and now he is commodifying his daughter and his grandson.
It's all just a transaction to him.
Exactly. But what pushes Evangeline past the point of no return isn't merely the repetition of history. It is Winston's absolute lack of remorse. When confronted, Winston doesn't apologize or feign guilt. He tells Evangeline that his bribery was the greatest gift she ever received because it allowed her to marry a man of his stature.
His arrogance is pathological. He truly believes that his wealth immunizes him from consequence and emotion, and that pathological arrogance becomes his death sentence.
Evangeline hears his justification, and Virginia describes the shift in her mother like a clock abruptly stopping at midnight. The dissociation is gone. It is replaced by a cold, calculating executioner.
She takes the butcher knife. She moves with a sudden, lethal grace, springing toward Winston, and she drives the blade deep into his abdomen.
The thematic irony here is profound. The patriarch, who spent his entire life controlling his environment through economic threats and psychological dominance, is physically undone by the quiet, subdued wife he assumed he had entirely broken.
But the violence is a contagion.
Evangeline immediately orders Ricky to take Virginia out of the room. Ricky, paralyzed by the sudden brutality, complies, dragging the stunned Virginia into the foyer. Evangeline emerges a moment later, her nightgown saturated in Winston's blood.
And then she performs her final act of agency. She slowly climbs the grand stairs. The tear in her gown reveals to Virginia that Evangeline hasn't just killed Winston. She has turned the knife on herself, plunging it into her own stomach.
She shattered the cage, but she knew she couldn't survive outside of it. The guilt of the murder, combined with the realization of the hollow, agonizing life she had lived, was insurmountable. It is a horrific, slow-motion murder-suicide.
And Ricky, the boy who took the money, he doesn't try to save Evangeline. He doesn't try to comfort Virginia. He simply drops the knife he managed to wrestle away from Evangeline on the floor, turns on his heel, and sprints out the massive front doors.
He vanishes into the darkness of the Maine coastline. He abandons Virginia alone in a cavernous house with the bleeding bodies of her parents.
Now we can connect this visceral truth to the grand misunderstanding that birthed a 50-year legend. Lenora, terrified by the commotion, had been hiding near the top of the grand stairs. She saw Virginia descending earlier, gripping the bloody butcher knife.
When Lenora finally creeps downstairs in the aftermath, she finds her parents dead, the house awash in blood, and Virginia in a state of catatonic shock. Lenora applies a simple, tragic logic. She saw her sister with the weapon, therefore her sister is the butcher.
And Virginia is in no psychological state to correct her. Virginia's mind is completely fractured. She looks at the carnage and assigns total responsibility to herself.
She believes her illicit affair, her pregnancy, and her desperate confrontation in the billiard room were the direct catalysts that forced her mother to commit murder and suicide.
The weight of that guilt is annihilating. She decides she cannot continue to exist in a world where she caused such destruction. So she calmly walks into the ballroom, pulls a heavy chair beneath the grand chandelier, fashions a haphazard noose from a drapery cord, and steps off into the air.
But the mechanics of the suicide attempt fail her. The noose isn't tied correctly to snap her cervical spine and grant her a quick death. Instead, it slowly, agonizingly suffocates her. The immense pressure crushes her larynx, ensuring she will never speak another word.
And the severe trauma to her spinal column permanently paralyzes her body. She attempted to escape the nightmare of her mind, and instead, she locked herself inside a decaying physical prison for the remainder of her life.
It is the architectural definition of a tragedy. The parents' obsession with status destroys the children. The children's assumptions cement a false reality.
Lenora, believing she is acting out of familial duty, covers up Virginia's suicide attempt and hides the butcher knife, thinking she is protecting her sister from the electric chair. She bribes the doctor, steals the identity, and the 54-year lie takes root in the blood-soaked floorboards of Hope's End.
It's a heavy, oppressive history, but we have to forcefully pull ourselves out of 1929 and snap back to the present-day narrative, because the consequences of that night are actively hunting our protagonist.
Get him, Carter.
Kit and Carter are currently in Kit's rattling Ford Escort, tearing away from the mansion. They are fleeing the physical decay of the house, but they are also fleeing the psychological weight of the revelations Kit has just uncovered.
Kit lays out the true history of the massacre for Carter, and Carter's reaction isn't shock at the violence. It is profound, ego-shattering disappointment.
Because Carter's entire presence at Hope's End was built on a delusion. He took the job at the estate, infiltrated the family, and actively plotted to secure a DNA test because he genuinely believed he was the missing heir.
He believed he was the baby that was taken away in the Packard. But when Kit explains the timeline of the secret birth, Carter's narrative collapses. Virginia gave birth prematurely. The baby Miss Baker transported to Canada was born months too early to be the full-term infant found abandoned on a church doorstep on Christmas morning.
Carter is not a Hope. His biological origins remain a complete mystery, entirely disconnected from the millions of dollars he thought he was owed.
His realization renders all his scheming utterly pointless. But from an investigative standpoint, Carter's lack of biological connection creates a massive, terrifying vacuum in Kit's logic.
Exactly. Kit is driving, the adrenaline is surging, and her brain is rapidly processing the implications. If Carter isn't the grandson, he doesn't stand to inherit a single dime of the Hope fortune. Therefore, he had absolutely zero financial motive to silence anyone.
Which brings us back to the catalyst of Kit's entire ordeal, the murder of Mary Milton. Mary, the previous nurse, was pushed off the cliff terrace because she knew a secret.
Kit initially hypothesized that Carter killed Mary to prevent her from revealing he wasn't the heir, or perhaps Lenora killed her to protect the family fortune, but neither of them had a compelling reason to commit first-degree murder over the results of a blood test.
Kit instinctively slams on the brakes. The car screeches to a halt in the middle of the road. She looks at Carter, sitting defeated in the passenger seat, and the realization crystallizes he is completely innocent of murder. The killer is still out there.
So, Kit engages in a rapid deductive process. Mary Milton drew Virginia's blood a day ahead of schedule. She possessed the laboratory results that conclusively proved Carter was not related to the Hopes. And where did Mary go on the evening before her death?
The logs prove she didn't go to the hospital laboratory. She went into town. She went to Kit's house. Mary was the unidentified woman Kit overheard having an intense, hushed argument with her father, Patrick McDeara.
Mary had taken those crucial blood test results directly to Patrick.
The question is why? Why would a nurse bring genetic evidence about a wealthy family to a retired, working-class local? This is the moment the realization hits Kit, and hopefully you, the listener, causing a structural collapse of her entire perceived reality.
It all clicks together.
Her father's name is Patrick. Patrick is commonly abbreviated to Pat, but depending on a person's preference, it can also be shortened to Ricky. Kit's father, the man who raised her, the quiet, steady presence in her life, is Ricky. He's the young man who worked on the Hope estate 54 years ago. He's the teenager who engaged in a secret affair with Virginia Hope. He's the father of the child stolen and sent to Canada.
He is the man who looked at $25,000 and decided it was worth more than his own son.
He is the coward who stood frozen while Evangeline butchered Winston and then ran into the night, leaving the woman he supposedly loved alone with the corpses.
We really have to unpack the catastrophic psychological damage this inflicts on Kit. Identity is largely constructed through our understanding of our parents. Kit's entire life has been anchored by the belief that her father was a decent, honorable, if somewhat passive man.
To discover that his foundational act as an adult was a grotesque display of greed and cowardice completely destabilizes her worldview.
He is the very catalyst for the generational trauma of the Hope family. But the horror deepens, because Patrick's cowardice didn't end in 1929. Patrick killed Mary Milton.
Right. Mary, armed with the blood tests and the typed manuscript pages from Virginia, pieced together the puzzle. She realized Patrick McDeara was the missing Ricky.
She confronted him with this truth. Patrick understood that if his identity was exposed, his quiet, respectable life, his standing in the community, would evaporate. So he agreed to meet Mary on the terrace of Hope's End under the guise of a negotiation, and he shoved her off the cliff to protect his fragile, unearned peace.
I want to push on this idea of Patrick's cowardice because it goes so much further than self-preservation. It crosses into active malignant betrayal, and it hits Kit right in her most vulnerable wound, the death of her mother.
The overdose.
Kit's mother died from a massive overdose of prescribed painkillers. Kit, who was acting as her primary caregiver, was blamed for negligently leaving the pill bottles within reach. She was subjected to a police investigation, she was suspended from her nursing job, and she was turned into a social pariah in her own hometown.
Her life was entirely dismantled.
And where was Patrick during all of this?
He was completely silent, and that silence is the ultimate unforgivable sin. When Kit finally turns the car around, storms back to the house, and confronts him, Patrick's confession is sickening in its banality.
He admits that he and his wife made a mutual, agonizing decision. She was suffering from terminal, unbearable pain, and they consciously chose to leave the pills out so she could end her suffering.
It was, in his mind, an act of mercy. But when the authorities arrived and the suspicion immediately fell on, Kit Patrick chose self-preservation over his daughter. He let Kit take the blame.
He sat at the kitchen table drinking coffee and reading the morning paper while he watched his own daughter get dragged through the mud. He watched her be treated like an incompetent killer, losing her career, her reputation, and her sense of self-worth.
He allowed her to carry the crushing weight of his guilt simply so he wouldn't face legal repercussions or societal judgment. It is absolutely revolting.
It creates a perfect, horrifying thematic parallel. Look at Winston Hope in 1929, a patriarch willing to ruin his daughter's life, willing to discard his own grandson entirely to protect his reputation and his comfort.
Fast forward 54 years, and Patrick McDeara executes the exact same maneuver. He ruins his daughter's life to protect his own freedom. The generational trauma of Hope's End isn't confined to the Hope bloodline. It is a psychological virus.
Ricky contracted that virus of selfishness in the billiard room in 1929, carried it out the front doors, and infected his own family with it decades later.
The virus analogy is so much more accurate than thinking of him as just a bad foundation. A foundation implies he was at least supporting something. Patrick is an active pathogen.
He outwardly presented as a safe harbor for Kit, but fundamentally he's been consuming her life to sustain his own. And when Kit recognizes this pathogen for what it is, her reality doesn't just cave in, it demands an immediate, aggressive response.
She realizes her father isn't just a passive coward. He is currently at Hope's End, actively tying up the final loose ends of his deception.
And the most significant loose end, the only other living human who possesses the knowledge that Patrick is Ricky, is Virginia Hope.
Driven by a mixture of profound betrayal and a desperate need to protect the vulnerable, Kit forces the rattling Ford Escort back up the winding coastal road. She abandons the car and runs back into the teeth of the storm, back into the mansion.
And we must address the physical environment of Hope's End in this climactic sequence, because the architecture is operating as an active participant in the scene. The tension is suffocating.
The structural integrity of the mansion perfectly mirrors the collapse of the narrative's secrets. The cliffside erosion has reached a critical terminal velocity. Kit describes the physical sensation of entering the house. The floorboards are pitched at such an extreme, severe angle that basic locomotion is difficult.
The doors are jammed in their warped frames. Heavy antique furniture is actively sliding across the rooms.
The house is audibly groaning, the timber snapping under the impossible weight of its own impending collapse, just as the 54-year edifice of lies is finally buckling under the weight of the truth.
Kit navigates the service stairs, physically leaning her body weight into the tilt of the hallway just to stay upright. She slips into the shadows of her own bedroom, her hand tightly gripping the sharp metal of the corkscrew she commandeered from the kitchen. She inches toward the adjoining door, peering through the crack into Virginia's room.
And the sight is chilling. There is Patrick, her father, the man who abandoned Virginia half a century ago, now sitting casually on the edge of her bed.
It is a reunion completely devoid of romance or nostalgia. 54 years later, Ricky and Virginia are occupying the same space, but the power dynamic is vastly different. Patrick assumes he holds all the cards.
He is monologuing, confessing his timeline. He admits he genuinely believed Virginia died by her own hand decades ago, which is the only reason he felt secure remaining in the same town, living a quiet life. He felt untouchable.
But when Mary Milton arrived at his doorstep, babbling about blood tests and a missing grandson, the illusion of safety shattered. He knew Virginia had to be alive, and more importantly, she had to be communicating.
His arrogance in this moment is staggering. He actually takes a moment to compliment Virginia's typing skills, mentioning that he read the manuscript pages she produced. He treats her narrative of immense suffering like a mildly interesting book report.
But his tone shifts to lethal pragmatism. He leans in and tells her she made a fatal error in revealing his name to Mary. And then this man who once claimed to love her, who fathered her stolen child, reaches out with his large, capable hands, wraps them around the throat of the paralyzed woman, and begins to squeeze the life out of her.
The vulnerability of Virginia in this moment is agonizing. But Kit refuses to be a passive observer to her father's violence any longer. She steps out of the shadows, breaking his concentration.
This sudden interruption provides a crucial split-second window for one of the most viscerally satisfying moments of physical agency in the entire narrative.
Right.
Because Virginia, despite her profound limitations, is not entirely helpless.
Earlier in the chaos, Kit had covertly slipped the corkscrew into Virginia's possession.
Yes. Virginia, summoning an unimaginable reservoir of willpower, utilizes her one functional appendage, her left hand. She grips that corkscrew, channels 54 years of accumulated rage, betrayal, and grief into her atrophied muscles, and drives the sharp metal spiral directly into Patrick's stomach.
It is a stunning reversal. It isn't a fatal strike, but the sudden, piercing agony forces Patrick to break his grip on her throat. He stumbles back, clutching his bleeding abdomen in shock.
Kit immediately capitalizes on the opening. She snatches the bloody corkscrew from him and brandishes it as a weapon against her own father. This is the emotional apex of their relationship. The facade is entirely gone.
Kit looks at the man who raised her and tells him with absolute clarity that she hates him, not just for attacking Virginia, but for the profound betrayal of letting her shoulder the blame for her mother's death.
Patrick attempts the classic maneuver of the cornered narcissist. He tries to justify his actions, stammering that he was wrong, pleading for understanding, attempting to leverage their familial bond. But the currency of his paternal authority is completely bankrupt.
The damage is irreversible. However, the climax of the scene is abruptly hijacked. The commotion, the shouting, the physical struggle, it hasn't gone unnoticed in the decaying house.
The door swings wide, and enter Lenora Hope, the real Lenora, the woman who orchestrated the grand deception. And she has discarded the wine glass. She is now leveling a heavy, loaded shotgun directly at the center of the room.
The introduction of Lenora creates an incredibly tense standoff layered with poetic irony. Lenora, fiercely protective of her domain, demands to know the identity of the intruder. Patrick, bleeding and desperate, introduces himself.
And in that frozen moment, you can almost see the tectonic plates of the narrative shifting in Lenora's mind. It dawns on her, half-century too late, that the man bleeding in front of her, Ricky, is the primary architect of her family's annihilation.
If Ricky had possessed a shred of integrity, if he hadn't accepted Winston's bribe, Evangeline would never have reached her breaking point. The butchery in the billiard room would never have occurred. Lenora's life wouldn't have been reduced to a grueling 54-year performance of servitude.
The realization hardens her features. She levels the twin barrels of the shotgun directly at Patrick's chest, her finger tight on the trigger. But Patrick's survival instinct is his defining trait. He doesn't beg Lenora, he manipulates the situation.
He points a trembling finger at Kit and tells Lenora that Kit shouldn't be forced to watch her father be executed. It's a masterful, manipulative play on sympathy.
Lenora's eyes instinctively flick toward Kit, her focus wavering for a fraction of a second. And Patrick exploits that hesitation instantly. He lunges.
The ensuing physical struggle is chaotic, messy, and desperate. Patrick's size gives him the advantage. He shoves Lenora violently backward, forcing her out of the bedroom and into the heavily slanting hallway, driving her toward the precipice of the grand stairs.
In the chaos of the grapple, the shotgun discharges. It's a deafening, concussive explosion in the confined space. A massive spray of lead tears into the antique wallpaper and plaster, filling the air with dust and the sharp, acrid smell of cordite. But the momentum of the struggle cannot be stopped.
Patrick manages to arrest his forward momentum, digging his heels into the slanted floorboards just at the edge of the top step. But Lenora cannot stop. She tumbles backward into the open air.
Her body arcs over the edge, performing a sickening, uncontrolled flip down the length of the grand stairs before impacting with a violent, bone-shattering thud on the landing below. The sheer tragic poetry of it is inescapable. She dies on the exact same stairs where, 54 years prior, she made the catastrophic assumption that Virginia was a murderer.
And that impact, that final burst of kinetic violence, acts as the definitive trigger for the architecture of Hope's end. The house, which has been clinging to the eroding cliffside purely by inertia, finally surrenders.
The narrative execution here is brilliant. We are denied the immediate, breathless aftermath in the hallway. The author employs a hard cut, thrusting us forward in time. We don't experience the collapse step by step. We experience the absolute finality of it.
The physical manifestation of the Hope family's corruption. The mansion with its blood-stained floors, its deceptive portraits, its hidden compartments of lies gives way entirely. The foundation shears off the rock face, and the massive structure plummets down the cliff, crashing with apocalyptic force into the churning Atlantic surf below.
It is completely obliterated, swallowed by the ocean. It is a stunning visual metaphor for the end of a curse.
The destruction operates as a necessary total cleansing. The earth itself rejects the physical vessel of the trauma, wiping the geography clean of the Hope family's secrets.
But amidst that apocalyptic destruction, there is survival. Kit makes it out, and more importantly, she doesn't escape alone. She manages the Herculean task of evacuating the paralyzed Virginia before the mansion slips into the void.
When the narrative settles, we find them in a radically different environment. They are living together in a bright, modern, accessible space, far removed from the oppressive shadows of the cliffs. Archie, the steadfast reporter, is a regular presence, offering a tether to the outside world.
Kit's father, Patrick, hasn't escaped the consequences this time. He is facing the justice system for his crimes. And the typed pages Virginia's manuscript have been recovered and authenticated, finally broadcasting the unvarnished truth of the 1929 massacre to the world. It feels like a hard-won, traditional resolution. The villain is exposed, the innocent are vindicated, and peace is established.
It presents the illusion of closure, but the architecture of this deep dive contains one final, hidden room. The story isn't over, because Virginia Hope has harbored a final secret.
And this secret completely obliterates every assumption we and Kit have made about Virginia's suffering. Kit is sitting in their new home reading the final, newly produced pages of Virginia's typed manuscript. And the words on the page reveal a truth so staggering it forces a complete reevaluation of the entire 54-year timeline.
The strokes, the debilitating bout with polio, even the absolute catastrophic paralysis, they were a fabrication. Virginia was never completely paralyzed.
The damage from the hanging was severe, yes, but she recovered her motor functions. She possessed the ability to move her limbs. She could walk. She could speak. She engaged in a conscious, deliberate performance of total immobility for 54 consecutive years.
You really need to pause and let the sheer, crushing psychological weight of that decision fully sink in. Our entire analytical framework has positioned Virginia as the ultimate tragic victim. We believed she was locked inside a fleshy prison against her will, entirely at the mercy of a cruel, manipulative sister who usurped her life.
But Virginia's confession rewrites her from a victim into a terrifyingly disciplined architect of retribution. Her silence, her perceived helplessness was not a medical condition. It was a weapon.
She willingly subjected herself to a half-century sentence of simulated locked-in syndrome, sacrificing her own physical freedom for one primary consuming objective: to punish Lenora.
The level of spite required to execute this is almost incomprehensible. It is the most patient, agonizingly slow act of vengeance imaginable. Virginia understood Lenora's core desires. She knew Lenora craved a life of European glamour, movement, and social adoration. So Virginia weaponized Lenora's guilt.
She played the role of the hopeless, tragic vegetable with flawless dedication, forcing Lenora to tether herself to the bedpost.
Virginia forced Lenora to trap herself in the suffocating role of a caretaker, a servant in a decaying house. She forced Lenora to watch her suffer every single day, ensuring that Lenora's punishment wasn't a quick execution, but a slow, decades-long attrition of her youth and vitality.
She allowed Lenora to strut around the house believing she was the warden, when in absolute reality, Virginia was holding the keys to the cell the entire time.
In her manuscript, Virginia coldly admits she considered simply murdering Lenora when she first returned from Paris. But she calculated that a quick death was insufficient penance for stealing her identity and her freedom. She desired a punishment that would stretch across an entire lifespan.
She meticulously transformed herself into the heavy, immovable burden that Lenora had always subconsciously feared she would become. It is an astonishing, terrifying display of willpower, fueled by a deep, pitch-black bitterness.
However, the psychological profile isn't entirely consumed by vengeance. Virginia outlines a second motivation for her immobility, one that injects a sliver of tragic hope into the horror.
Yes, the anchor that kept her in that bed wasn't just hatred for her sister, it was the memory of the baby. Virginia rationalized that if she fled Hope's End, if she revealed her mobility and started a new life, she would sever the only geographic tether she had to her stolen child.
She believed that if the son Miss Baker smuggled to Canada ever discovered his true origins and came searching for his biological mother, he would inevitably arrive at the gates of Hope's End. If she wasn't there, he would never find her. So she endured 54 years of silent, agonizing anticipation for a child she was permitted to hold for exactly 1 second.
And the emotional payoff for that half-century of waiting arrives through a beautifully unexpected, almost invisible channel. We must look back at the character of Jessie, the young, seemingly innocuous maid who is employed at the mansion.
Jessie is such a brilliant narrative mechanism. We initially view her just as a source of comfort for Virginia. Jessie would bring her portable Walkman into the bedroom, slide the headphones over Virginia's ears, and play cassette tapes of thick historical novels like John Jakes's North and South.
It seems like a simple act of kindness to stimulate a brain-dead patient. But Jessie was utilizing analog technology to conduct a covert dialogue.
Halfway through the tape, the professional narration of the audiobook would abruptly cut out, replaced by the crackling recording of Jessie's own voice. Jessie spoke directly into Virginia's ear, bypassing Lenora's surveillance entirely.
And Jessie didn't just offer comfort, she offered revelation. On the tape, Jessie said, "I know you're not Lenora, you're Virginia. I know you didn't butcher your parents in the billiard room. And observing your micro movements, I'm entirely convinced you can move and speak."
Jessie possessed an acute observational intelligence that stripped away the illusions of Hope's end. But the most earth-shattering revelation delivered through those plastic headphones wasn't the deduction of Virginia's innocence or her faked paralysis. It was a statement of biological fact. Jessie's voice on the tape said, "By the way, I'm your granddaughter."
It is a stunning emotional crescendo. Jessie, the maid, is the direct descendant of the stolen baby. The infant who was banished to Canada in the back of a Packard grew up, led a fulfilling life as an artist, and raised a daughter named Jessie.
Upon his death, the real Miss Baker finally confessed the truth of his origins to Jessie. Armed with this history, Jessie deliberately sought employment at Hope's End, infiltrating the estate to locate her biological grandmother and unearth the truth of her family's dark legacy.
The thematic resonance is perfect. The cycle of violent patriarchal isolation initiated by Winston Hope is finally broken. And it isn't broken by violence or bribery. It is broken by a clever, determined young woman utilizing a piece of consumer technology, a Walkman, to penetrate the walls of a fortress. Virginia finally reclaims the familial connection that was brutally severed in 1929.
Which culminates in a final joyous yet deeply surreal image. We are in Kit's new, bright home. Kit is in the bathroom taking a hot shower. She has the radio tuned to a pop station, and the Go-Go's "Our Lips Are Sealed" is playing.
It is an incredibly fitting, almost cheeky thematic soundtrack for a story fundamentally about the destructive nature of keeping secrets.
The water is running, creating a curtain of white noise.
Yep.
And while Kit is entirely distracted, a car pulls into the driveway. It is Jessie.
And Virginia, after maintaining a 54-year performance of profound physical brokenness, after enduring decades of atrophy and silent rage, executes a simple, miraculous action.
She stands up from her wheelchair.
She walks out the front door, crosses the lawn, and gets into the car. And she drives away with her granddaughter, finally and completely free from the legacy of Hope's End.
Kit eventually turns off the water, dries off, steps out of the bathroom, and walks into the living room, only to find the empty wheelchair sitting in the center of the floor.
And that visual of the empty chair leaves us grappling with a deeply unsettling philosophical question. When we analyze the totality of Virginia's life, we are forced to ask, did she actually win the horrific psychological game her family forced upon her? Objectively, she outlasted them all. She survived her tyrannical father, her tragic mother, her cowardly lover, and her manipulative sister. She escaped the collapsing mansion, and she successfully reunited with her bloodline. But the currency she used to purchase that victory was 54 years of her own existence, spent staring at a ceiling, pretending to be mute and paralyzed. Did she achieve the ultimate triumph of will, or did she simply waste half a century of potential joy in the obsessive pursuit of vengeance? When the pop music fades out in Kit's bathroom and she is left staring at that empty chair, is she looking at a tragedy of irrevocably lost time, or is she looking at the absolute only happy ending possible for a hope?